The game that can make your dreams come true by RubixRaptor.
Howdy! Arma 3 is one of the best military simulators I have ever played. It's also one of the best Warhammer 40k games I've ever played, and one of the best Halo games I have ever played, and even one of the best Half-Life games I've ever played. Of course, I'm alluding to the fact that Arma 3 is a very moddable game, and today we are going on a spirit journey through that. The title of this video is incredibly true to me. All I've wanted to do while going through the Halo games was to play as a UNSC Marine, fighting the impossible odds of their galaxy. Through Arma, I have been able to do that. Not just by myself, but with 80 other people, as we got pasted by hunters and glassed by cruisers. One of the most common comments I got on my Space Marine 2 video was people dreaming of being able to fight a battle as the guardsman of Cadia. You probably know what I'm getting at, but in Arma, it's just as fun as you might think it would be. I've been able to pretend to be an SG-1 team traveling through stargates to distant worlds, or fight necromancers in a dark forest as the Knights of Reikland. I even got to accompany Snake on his missions as the Diamond Dogs, and all of this is to say that Arma has made countless of my dreams come true, and today I get to talk about that, so yay. That really goes into why I'm making this video, and truthfully, there is quite a few reasons. The first being that I feel a strange mysticism kind of floats around Arma, whether that's from news stations claiming it's real war footage, or the billion comments asking what game it is every time I post a clip of it. I also feel like a good portion.
This is one of those that I have trouble taking people seriously because of things like that. And that's ultimately why due diligence is so important, because that's a big way to tank your credibility. Like, imagine if I were doing a segment on, I don't know, current events or whatever, and I used Arma footage claiming that this is, actually what's going on. Or if there's a still from RubixRaptor's or even Soviet Womble's Arma streams that's kind of ripped, like either for like Fish News status or like Arma 3 bull shenaniganry from Soviet Womble, and that's used. That is such a fast way to tank your credibility, because it just means you're not doing your due diligence. That is something that I really get rubbed the wrong way over. And obviously, we're all going to say something wrong. We're obviously going to cite something wrong, right? Obviously, there's common knowledge like, oh, well, this guy's blue. Well, yeah, this guy do, in fact, be blue. And, scientific explanations into that. Sure, we can dive into that. But, like, it's not hard to do your due diligence. And especially with an age where AI is so prevalent, I think that it's more important now than ever to not only, do your due diligence, to make sure the information that you have is the most accurate information, but to also hold others accountable when they just blatantly spread misinformation and disinformation, and they clearly just don't do their research. Just one of those things that really gets my goat.
Portion of people that might enjoy watching Arma content might be curious about the moving parts that put these crazy events together, because there's a lot of them. Lastly, I've always been bad at explaining the game I play to my father. So hi, Dad. Hopefully this video explains the game that I left my secure government intelligence job for, but that might be a dream on its own. I could really go on with the reasons why I'm making this video, but at this point, I think you get it. And in general, there's just too much to talk about with this game. I really had to narrow the scope just to full conversion mods and dream making, because when you start going into the secret aliens hidden in the Arma files, or the fact that the developers for this game got arrested by the Greek military for spying on NATO bases, actually, we will go into those, because that's very funny. Regardless, this is probably a video that deserves a better person than me to make it, as Arma is a monolith of unknowable game knowledge and a 20-year-old esoteric code base, but I am going to take a swing at it. My qualifications include a few hours in the game and running my own Arma community. I also had the privilege to interview a dozen or so mod teams, so you will hear much smarter people talk about the game than I. Also, speaking of which, side note, I can't put into words how much I appreciate everyone that makes content for this game. So if I didn't have time to interview you or your team, know that I definitely wanted to, but I couldn't because this entire video I made in 2 weeks. So if you're up for it, let us go on an adventure. An adventure through Star Wars, Command & Conquer, SCP, Fall of Man, Helldivers, Starship Troopers, Dune, Ace Combat, and Battletech. An adventure through Arma 3, a game that can make your dreams come true.
Yeah? I honestly thought that was the perfect introduction. I mean, it was about 3.5 minutes just shy, 3 minutes, 22 seconds. I firmly disagree that he thinks he is the wrong person to describe this, because for all intents and purposes, I would argue he's one of the better people to explain this. I mean, sure, anyone can reasonably put up with it. You could be like, well, this person has 2-3 million subscribers on YouTube. They'd be far more qualified. That's just numbers. That's just metric. At the end of the day, I mean, your content does speak for itself. It speaks to the quality, the work ethic. It speaks to how good you are at speaking. I speak like oh god, I hate my speech pattern, especially when I pause so much. Oh, I hate it. But like, I think that was a perfect introduction, especially getting into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be discussing over the next however long. So I think he is the perfect person to be able to discuss Arma, and reasonably, I mean, as long as you at least understand the game, right? As long as you're able to put your argument into a coherent and educated opinion, that's really all that should matter. I, as someone who might boot up Arma and get confused in the mod list, and spend maybe 20 to 40 hours just trying to make mods work, right? I feel I have less of an opinion on that. You run, as you said, your own Arma community. You have X amount of hours in the game, several thousand. You have an active channel who, I mean, yes, you do content like Final Fantasy 14. You do Fish News, other games. You do, like the Marvel Rivals video just came out. So yes, you do other things, but I feel Arma is a lot of what you're known for and a lot of what people want to see. Like, well, what is Rubix and Ignis doing in this operation this week? I think that speaks for itself. So I would go out on a limb and say that you're the perfect person to be able to put together a presentation like this.
Our story begins with the developers of Arma 3, that being Bohemia Interactive, a now long-standing studio in modern-day Czechia and/or the Czech Republic. Its creators have a fascinating tale from developing games behind the Iron Curtain to creating military software for the United States Marine Corps, all of course for it to culminate in me being able to throw a crack grenade into my friend last weekend. Yeah! Oh, that one flew bad. The founders of BI being the brothers, and I'm so sorry for my pronunciation, Marek and Andrej Spanel, which I guarantee you is not how you say their name, as well as Slavomir Pevelek. Definitely didn't get that one right. Regardless, they found their start during the communist regimes of Eastern Europe. As you might expect, getting into programming or even having a computer in those times was a little difficult. The brothers only getting an 8-bit Texas Instrument from a Sweden trip that in an article on their website they said had no storage capability, so they had to rewrite the entire code base of their game every time they restarted it, which sounds like the plight of Sisyphus to me. Of course, with the crumbling of the regimes throughout Europe, the brothers and their business partners were able to start developing on Atari with titles such as Blood and The Invasion of Aldebaran. Though, right after Marek was drafted into the Czech army, where they didn't stop developing games even while serving, and eventually coming out with the game Gravon, which truly looks like the primordial ooze that the Arma franchise might have spawned out of. It was also one of the first Czech games to break out and be sold in the West, though that was partly by pure force of will, as a story goes that one of the brothers walked around Paris with a briefcase of Gravon copies selling them. Also, fun side fact, you can actually play Gravon as a minigame in one of BI's later games, Take on Mars. Moving forward, Bohemia Interactive was then officially created in 1999, where a team of 4 began making their own engine called Real Virtuality. This engine would be used to produce their first project, codenamed Poseidon, which would then be later called Operation Flashpoint. Also, fun fact, Arma 3 is still running on the Real Virtuality engine, albeit the 4th version of that engine, but it's still got a lot of that DNA, which, by the way, is a point a lot of the mod developing teams have pointed out working on it. Also, funny story, but during a Games Expo to promote Flashpoint, they had a T-55 tank next to their game demos. They would later find out that it was a fully functional T-55 tank that they had brought into a show full of hundreds of people, which is very funny to me. Actually very related, but Bohemia Interactive still owns a tank, a T-72 with a disabled firing mechanism, which used to have a Twitter account for it. I think it's gone because I can't find it anymore. Anyway, when Operation Flashpoint released, it quickly became one of the best-selling PC games at the time with over 2 million sales. To say that is a lot at the time is definitely an understatement. People were enthralled by the concept of having a sandbox where you could make your own military adventure and tell your own story within in the game, which is something, in my opinion, that the franchise has still held onto to this day. Celebrating their release, the developers went to the Game Developers Conference in America, where Merrick actually was given an award by Gabe Newell, which is probably someone you're familiar with. At the same time, the success of such a military simulator was not ignored by many, at least so Western armies. Bohemia Interactive then having the opportunity to set up a branch office in Australia, which would develop VBS-1, a military training software version of Flashpoint that would be used by notable clients such as the United States Marine Corps. Later versions of the software is still in use today by Western militaries, though the studios that developed them were sold by Bohemia, where they would eventually be owned by the British company Bay Systems. Of course, speeding things up, the next title to come out was Armed Assault, the first game from BI to rock the Arma name, once again finding amazing success and following up with Arma 2, which is my first Arma game I ever played, and man, it was fun. While the game was very positively received on its own, what they probably didn't anticipate was a silly little mod coming around called DayZ. For anyone on YouTube at the time, I do not need to explain how much of an internet sensation Arma 2 DayZ mod was. I am guilty of buying Arma 2 just to play that mod, and it's one of the earliest examples I can think of where Arma began to become a vessel for the creativity and passion of its own community. While they continued to make DLC for Arma 2, like the masterpiece that is Operation Arrowhead, they also started work on their next project, which was originally called Arma Futura, which of course would then be called Arma 3. However, at the time to plan for this game, and I kid you not, was a super future sci-fi where we would be fighting aliens. Actually, in one of my interviews with a mod developer, they pointed out that not all of that disappeared, and some of it like secretly resides in the code of Arma 3.
There are textures and models hidden in the Arma 3 code for a little gray man alien. And they've just been in there since 2013. I don't know why it's there, what its purpose is for, but they just have them hanging out.
What's it?
Reticulon _F_CO.
Has he existed before Contact, or?
Yes.
That's terrifying, I think.
Let him fly, man. Let him out, Bohemia.
As you also probably heard me mention there, Bohemia did release a Alien DLC called Contact, but still pretty far flung from the whole alien invasion game that we could have had. Also, recently, as a nod towards what could have been, they did add a vehicle called the Futura Tank. It has a railgun. It's in the basic game now. You can just use it.
That's
also,
so cool.
The setting for this game would be peculiar, that being the Mediterranean. For the main map, they were going to model it off of the Greek island of Lemnos. And since they were committed to the accuracy for their games, what's the worst thing that could happen if a few of them took pictures of military? Okay, well, they got arrested.
This is definitely one of those things. I'm trying to make sure that I can try to get through some sections. I'm trying to keep notes. I actually have my phone pulled up to keep some notes off to the side, because I think that this in full is going to be it's a fantastic presentation so far, and I want to make sure I'm giving the proper time for it. So this actually kind of is interesting to think about, because first of all, based Marine Corps, I like that they're just like, yeah, no, this software, cool, we can use this. That also ties into this point where maybe it's because I live in the year, I don't know, 2025, as currently watching this, right? Where national security is kind of that like concept that's just kind of thrown to the wayside at this point in time, right? Like, not to get into too much detail about national security in general, for the past 20 or so years, U.S. is like, well, matter of national security, bam. Well, why can't I do this? Or why is this national security, right? It's kind of the like Uno reverse card. So it's actually fairly interesting to see. I guess, to be fair, I guess it comes down to they were on the not Soviet side of the Iron Curtain. Well, clearly they were under the Iron Curtain, right? Because they had to develop under the Iron Curtain, and that's where you had the system that they developed on before, right? I don't know. It's just interesting to think about, especially because that's such a hot button topic anymore, right? Like, if this happened in 2025, right? Would it be declared a matter of national security? Would they be denied because of national security? If you worked a government contract job, would someone look at you if you were downloading some? If you were heavily invested into a project like this, a international military sim? It's interesting to think about. I think that I'm digging way too deep. I think that I'm thinking about potential things that can arise. 4, 5, 6 steps down the line that are removed from the current issue, quote unquote. But I think it's something to definitely think about. Especially it's just really funny because this ties into the whole point now of just flying over Greece, and for accuracy's sake, obviously. But Yeah, I don't think a lot of companies would be able to do that. Can you imagine if Activision Blizzard did that? If Activision Blizzard for Call of Duty just started flying over without permission, just started flying over some like NATO military bases or even U.S. military bases, right? Like if it flew over like Fort Polk or something like that. I don't know. I think it's an interesting thing to consider.
Two of them got arrested by the Greek military for espionage, and not just for a little bit. They were in prison for 129 days before finally being released after a meeting between the Greek and Czech presidents, which was one of the more eventful things that happened during the development of Arma 3, the funny game that we are talking about today. That pretty much brings us up to speed, besides the fact that Arma 3 is not the latest Arma game, as Arma Reforger exists, but we'll be visiting that, as well as circling back to Bohemia in terms of how they interact with our modding community. But for now, we have to tackle the question of what actually is Arma 3. I wanna ride on the prairie. Armed Assault.
So before we get into the mission segment, there's a couple things I wanted to kind of bring up from the prior section. First and foremost is going to be the distribution. Obviously, through sheer force of will, being able to break into the Western game market. I mean, that's no small feat, especially in a, I would argue, post-Cold War era, right? Then again, I guess maybe curiosity was at an all-time high. It's interesting to think about that time period. But why I bring up the distribution is it's not dissimilar to certain bands. Right? I think Metallica comes to mind, right? Where allegedly, from what I hear, old Metallica, some old rock bands, used to in California, used to like, and elsewhere as well. They used to distribute like their CDs and stuff, their music to try and get a name for themselves to kind of force their way onto the scene. The thing that I like about this is Arma remains pretty approachable. Like I haven't played Arma 3. I don't know even where to start. It's also a time investment. I've had a bunch of people ask, hey, Kip, do you want to get into Warframe? I'm just like, I have a lot of time investments as is. Work definitely keeps me busy, especially like, reactions that I'm going to be spending, maybe 2 hours on, right? It just takes a while not only to do my job, but then it's one of those that it's because Arma is such a nebulous concept to me. And, I hear that some of the shots that are definitely in these videos are definitely the good shots because the engine definitely still kind of chugs along in some capacity. But that's, you throw enough mods on anything, right? Fallout New Vegas does that. That's not necessarily fair. However, getting back to the distribution standpoint, it's because Metallica did that, allegedly at least. But it felt like they kind of pulled the ladder up behind them, so to speak, where we had Metallica v. Unfaith, which I've talked about ad nauseum, which over a chord progression and Metallica winning it did set precedent for modern music copyright. Like that's a thing that I've been very, very not necessarily aggressive on, but like, hi, yeah, Metallica, I see you. I see this legal case and you've made my life you've made a lot of what I do a complete headache because of it. Well, there's also another actor, I can't remember who it was specifically. He got big in Hollywood off of being small, but then once he got his foot in the door, kind of pulled it up around him, pulled up the ladder behind him, and is just like, you can't hire based on these qualifications. I'm sure there's more there. I'm sure there's more context there. But why I bring these two up is to kind of go into that distribution method, and then Arma still seems, at least from face value, humble. It's not like, well, now that we're big and now that we have Arma 3 and Arma Reforger, we're going to pull the modding ladder up behind us and, we're going to sell you this product, or we might sell you this as a live service. It for all intents and purposes, it seems like you buy Arma and you have it. I don't know if you necessarily have to connect to a server. I don't know if I'm sure there's potentially an Arma account there. As many things like Marvel Rivals, you buy, quote unquote, buy the game, right? You get a license to the key. Well, so if Marvel Rivals, since it's free, you just get your license, right, to access the product for as long as the product is going to remain up, and you don't actually own it. You usually have to sign into a third-party account. It just turns into a headache. That's why modern Call of Duty just makes my head hurt because of signing into that Activision Blizzard account, right? But it seems like they've remained humble, and it seems like they've remained fairly consistent, and it seems like, here's our product. Buy this product if you want, right? And I'm a huge fan of that. I'm a huge fan of engaging in the distribution networks that other things have done, Metallica, Hollywood actors, etc., but not necessarily pulling up the ladder behind them. I have a lot of respect for that. In regards to the tank, that's actually really funny. I like that they just bring tank to event. Oh, wait a minute. So it has an active firing mechanism. That's honestly really cool. Obviously, I'm assuming after. If the tank was before or after the Greek incident, that definitely would determine certain things. I'm assuming this was before, but even after, still being able to just own a decommissioned tank is actually really cool. The hidden files as well, I feel that's kind of a thing of the era. When we very specifically talk about that, I mean, we're talking, what comes to mind is what the coconut in, is it coconut in TF2, or how Payday 2 has certain files with certain things in it. Very, very funny. I like that they can be done as Easter eggs, but in certain places like Team Fortress 2, you run into the, I don't know why this is here, but now we can't remove it. Elaborate joke? Unintended consequence? Who knows? It is really funny, though, and I actually really enjoy this.
Vault 3, in its core principle, is a game where you make a mission and then you play it. There's two ways to do this, either PvP or PvE, and or you could also mix them, but I am going to refuse to go into those semantics. What we are mostly going to be focusing on is the PvE aspect of mission creation. However, we will be circling back to the philosophy that goes into making a PvP mission. When it comes to mission creation, everything starts with the Eden Editor, a marvel of a 3D game design tool fully included and integrated into Arma itself. With the editor, you're first able to pick the terrain you want to work with, and then you give your mission a name. From there, you have thousands of assets ranging from military units to vehicles, buildings, and even pieces of paper that you can adorn your adventure that you're about to create. At this point, I have to pause and bring up one of the strongest statements about this game. Arma 3 is military D&D. Yeah. It is your job as the dungeon master to weave a story for your players. This can be for just a handful of friends or legitimately hundreds of people. Everyone at once say what their favorite thing in Arma is. Actually, in the case of some talented modders that we will talk to later, Arma can literally be D&D, dice and all. Going forward with that philosophy, the mission maker can get to work. And as a quick and dirty example, let's make a mission. Today, I think it would be good to have a group of soldiers raiding an insurgent weapon cache. The first thing that we're going to do is place down units that we want to become our players, mark them as playable, and tweak their loadouts to something we want. Additionally, we're going to set up a respawn point for them and add that to the mission settings. Also, normally Arma will not save their custom loadouts when they respawn. However, using the mod 3D Enhance gives us that option. Alternatively, since Arma is such a flexible game when it comes to scripting, we can also write something that saves their loadout when they die and then applies it to them when they respawn. Now we're going to set up our bad guy AI in the house as well as decorate it a bit. We don't want these objects to affect our players or server performance, so we're going to disable the simulation on them. And then lastly, for some fun, we're going to set up a trigger at the house that calls local forces around them to come reinforce the house once these soldiers get there. This is an absolutely simple example of a mission, but reflects one of the 3 core mission design strategies, which is a pre-designed curated mission. All of our AI are placed, the objective is static, and once it's in the hand of the players, the mission maker's job is done. However, there are 2 other ways to go about it. The second is something that is above my knowledge base, which is procedural generation. Through Arma alone, you can write scripts that dynamically create objectives, spawn enemies, and run the game world live, much like any other PvE game would. Examples of these are player-made modes such as Invade and Annex, Liberation, and Astasi, and by far, these are the hardest to make. But they're also the most rewarding, as you can play against the machine, and it is a wonderful way to get into Arma and play a unique mission experience with your friends. It's also prone to goofy moments like playing Mike Force and having these scripts spawn an actual legion of enemies who destroy everything you love.
I think we already killed all the people that could counterattack.
Oh my god! The last strategy is probably the most iconic and important to the overall success of Arma 3, that being Zeus. Zeus is a feature that was added to Arma 3 after release, and I desperately want the names of the people who came up with it because they are my heroes. When I mentioned that Arma was military D&D, this is actually that. Live during the game, you are a free-flying camera that can spawn enemies, mess with the environment, and interact with your players all while the mission is actively going on. You can change objectives depending on how things are going, decide what happens to your players on the fly, and most importantly, you're able to tell a fun and engaging story just like a dungeon master in D&D would. The stuff that this tool lets you do is groundbreaking and is a key reason why it's made Arma a perfect place to bring your dreams to fruition. A big thing is that you can direct the enemy to act more like real people, like a real commander is controlling them. For example, in a case from my past video where you saw a defensive wall light up with armaments, it was actually a Zeus suppression command given by the game master. Zeus also lets you directly control any AI unit on the map, which is a dangerous power to have. On one hand, it can fully challenge your players and immerse them into the feeling that they are fighting a real enemy, but on the other other hand, it's easy to get ahead of yourself and obliterate the people playing your mission. After all, you are literally God. You can kill anyone you want at any time and no one can stop you. So, instead of remote controlling a unit that you place behind your friends, a good Zeus purposely pulls their shots, does goofy things, and prioritizes their players' fun over everything. Which is definitely something you can find happening to us a lot in our Arma adventures.
Oh, behind you. Failed stealth again.
Oh! What the fuck was that? However, like with most things, this comes with a caveat. Depending on the group that you're playing with, some may be looking for a more serious environment where players want to be punished for their mistakes or that goofs might take away from the immersion that they are looking for. There's of course nothing wrong with either style of play, whether you enjoy room clearing milsim or third-person abusing casual play, as I am terribly guilty of. The important thing is that you're enjoying yourself and that if you're a Zeus, that you know your audience and that you're delivering the adventure everyone came there for.
Right.
Moving on, another crazy thing that Arma lets you do is run scripts and code live during an event. So in the hands of a talented scripter or programmer, like for example my friend Scorch, the game is truly putty in your hands and delivers an experience unmatched by anything I have ever played.
Fuck you, Oga. Fuck you. Fly, bitch.
Now with all those methodologies laid out, I can tell you that a lot of the time a mission will use all three of these simultaneously. For example, you might first create a static mission, set up the environment and objectives, and then add procedural modules for stuff like enemy movement and fire support. A great example for this specifically is stuff like mods developed by fellow Arma YouTuber Remy, which includes light AI fire support, which puts the ball in the court of AI far more dynamically than setting up static AI responses. Then once the mission is done, you can run it alongside Zeus, able to guide the story, assist players when they inevitably blow themselves up, and increase the challenge when necessary. This brings me back to reiterate that the Eden editor and Zeus are some of the most critical pillars towards Arma 3's success and why it's able to deliver dream-creating wonders through modding. This is also not just my opinion, but something that came from a lot of the interviews and conversations I had with modders.
Being a mission maker myself, without Eden, like Zeus is nice, don't get me wrong, but a 3D editor where you can do anything you want, like I've made some crazy stuff in Eden just to make a 5-minute cool set piece that somebody will look at, even if it's like it took me 2 hours to make. I think it is vital, especially in the overhaul communities where you do like Warhammer, you do you know, anything else, Halo.
Well, it's like a game dev tool that's built into the game.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember being a mission maker for Arma 2, and we can't go back to that.
I mean, you guys all remember when Arma 3 launched with only a 2D editor.
Yeah, it like till 2016. I remember I was
my day.
Yeah, I was watching the dev videos about like they're putting a new 3D editor. I'm like, the whoa?
I really divide Arma into like multiple ages, which is telling on how old this fucking game is. But
the dark age to the golden age.
Like the first year was the age of no, I'm gonna still play Arma 2, followed by the Sumatras and the Altus Life like script set missions that were run by dedicated servers, followed by dedicated life servers, followed by the Eden editor coming out, and then the unit renaissance of them being able to make missions every week. I also have to point out before we move on that even 10 years after release, Eden still gets new features to create missions with. Recently, and I probably have to credit the Bohemia developer Deadman Miller, who by the way is a god. I'm pretty sure he's one of the last devs fully committed to Arma 3, and he has worked on some fantastic updates and fixes for the game very late into its life. That being said, one day we randomly got terrain deformation, like the ability to move land up and down and to literally mold the entire world in the Eden editor. We definitely have some mission makers in Ignis that immediately abuse that to the point of collapse in reality, but I just thought it was important to mention. And hopefully that has started to cover the schematics, or at least the bare bone framework of a PvE mission. We can then quickly address some stuff that goes into a PvP mission. In most instances, making a PvP mission is more complicated and easier at the same time. When creating the mission, you don't need to worry about setting up the AI and what they're going to do and mission objectives controlled by said AI. However, you do need to account for real people, and knowing the general Arma player base, that is a catastrophic Herculean task. In a lot of cases as well, you are building an asymmetric mission where each side of the player base has different advantages and disadvantages adding to the complexity. In reference to the modding side of Arma, a lot of the mods are not set up for PvP. For example, in Imperial Conquest, the guardsmen just default have more health and armor than the Chaos Cultist. So, when you are like me and you are building a cultist versus guardsman PvP operation, you suddenly find that you have to replace the armor of the cultist, or else the guardsmen can just take 7 more las bolts than their enemy. In general, though, PvP missions can be far more engaging mentally because you're fighting the greatest game, man, but there is some of the camaraderie and laid-back atmosphere that you do lose when you're not playing a PvE mission. A lot of the times in our group, we focus on much more arcadey PvP missions, such as King of the Hill, or Elimination, or Infection. However, a lot of fantastic groups do large-scale battles that more resemble a military movement. Some, off of the top of my head, are Coalition or Friday Night Fights, which host fantastic, massive events between players, and delivers an experience that's completely unique from a PvE mission in both how they are played and how they are made. I'm not going to go any deeper into the intricacies of trying to balance 2 sides in an Arma mission, but you can kind of get the vibe on similarities and differences, as well as why modding might handle each of these mission types a little differently. For example, off of the top of my head, there's a homebrew sci-fi universe mod called Scion Conflict, which was originally designed just for a PvP group. However, Operation Trebuchet, the Halo mod, which we are going to cover very soon, was more designed with a PvE environment in mind. Actually, on that note, I feel like we've established a pretty basic foundation on how Arma works, so now we get to go into some of the outstanding mods made for it that essentially turned it into a different game. Though, I want to end this section with a capstone. Arma 3 has its own single-player campaign, and the devs gave the players every tool they used to make their own. The only thing I can think to compare that to is Valve giving its player base Source Filmmaker after it made all of its promotional animations. Like, hey, we were able to create something really cool with this. Here you go. And I truly believe that's one of the reasons Arma 3 is so successful and why it is so fun to play. I believe it is now mod time.
Before we get into mods, I assure you I do keep notes. If I do want to state, because between these sections I do have a lot that I want to go over. That is where the actual reaction is going to be taking place. So I would ask, because RubixRaptor did put, as he said, 2 weeks of time into this easily, I would ask that if you're just going to skip ahead, I would recommend just watching the original video. I would recommend watching RubixRaptor's original commentary, because I will be adding points. I will be adding a lot. I'm going to try to keep my points down to a minimum. Like, for example, here I have legal, demand, and legal, demand, and non-compliance. Like, there's points that I have that lead into other conversations. So I will try to minimize bloat in my commentary. However, there's going to be some commentary because there's a lot of information in this piece, which I love. I absolutely love this. So in regards to missions, the mission maker kind of reminds me of Battle for Middle-earth. I don't know if you've played that, Lord of the Rings RTS. There was a mission creator that you could do for it. I never had a PC powerful enough. It always crashed whenever I tried to save it way back in the day. I'd have to see about trying it on modern hardware. However, very good. I do like that. The word that comes to mind with Arma is honestly modularity, because it is just that. You can make your own mission. As said, you can add your own terrain and stuff like that. We have the terrain editor where you can up and down, right? Making that kind of Inception style level that we saw. Very, very cool, honestly. Very much a fan of that. Leading into the assets part of this, I mean, it was really cool to see, top secret documents and stuff. Especially with thousands of assets. I mean, it'd be very easy for a game like this, especially in the modern gaming space, to be like, well, do you want the top secret document pack? And you get several different assets that are just reskins of it. Effectively think like asset flip culture, right? Or just trying to, or line go up mentality. So it's very easy for companies to default to things like that, where especially in modernity with the games market the way that it is, they could have all been DLCs, they could have all been season passes. And I'm very, very glad it's not. I think it does speak a lot to the character, speaks a lot to the integrity of Arma of Bohemia as a studio, which I'm very, very much a fan of. Makes me wonder if they've actually ever gotten in trouble over assets, which kind of leads into the next point. This next point actually ties into a few other points I had in this section. Military D&D, I like it. I like that as a descriptor. I think that fits it very well. I think that me as somebody coming into this, it makes it more approachable, right? Makes it more approachable as somebody who's like, man, I would love to do, some kind of 3D modeling. Eventually, I would like to make, games, but it sounds like we had from Arma 2, we had the DayZ mod. So it is possible to bounce off of that. We do know that historically companies do get upset at that. League of Legends came from a Warcraft 3 mod, right? And that's when we get into Warcraft 3 Reforged with Blizzard, where Blizzard completely unlisted it and the only one is Warcraft 3 Reforged, and in that terms of service, they can take anything that really is made in their mission editor, from what I understand. Very much a huge controversial thing that a lot of people didn't like and was a huge black eye for Blizzard. So it is very interesting to see that. I like the D&D, military D&D makes a lot of sense, and that leads into a later point down the line of just knowing your players, which I like that he covered. I did like that he covered that. Once again, we come to the term modularity. Being military D&D, I mean, do you want more vehicles? Do you want more tanks? Do you want a strictly person-be-person skirmish, being able to go lean into both PvE and PvE side of things, which there are those few players who do like both. Generally, you will find people in there either a PvP player or a PvE player. I personally am a PvE player, right? I hate most multiplayer games in terms of PvP. Halo's really been the one I was able to stick with for any sort of length. I'm the kind of person that will want to run things like Destiny 2. I'll run raids all day, but Crucible or Trials just get me out of there. Something along the lines of Final Fantasy 14, hate Frontlines, but at the same time, I'll go through Praetorium every day in the week just to hear, tell me, whom do you fight? What was the line? Tell me, for whom do you fight, right? Or I'll go through Ultima just to hear such devastation. This was not my intention. Which Rubix does have jump scares in his videos, which I actually really do love that. Which leads into we'll go into scripting next, because that was kind of the branching off point of that. I like that scripting is a thing. I like that ties into modularity, because you are able to script certain things very well. You're able to do, as one of the individuals mentioned, you're able to do some really interesting things that you spend 2 hours building to make a 5-minute set piece. The fact that you can do that leads into the conversation prior about Arma not pulling up the ladder behind them, being able to give you that kind of access. Think like Halo Forge, right? That kind of mentality, right? But I guess maybe Forge might have borrowed from this specifically in regards to Arma 2 creators. I have to check the release dates on those. And I've been very, very transparent that I think that things like Forge and Theater were absolutely just the best. Like they were pinnacle. They were peak. I think that leads, especially into the content creation, because it's free publicity, right? At the end of the day, right? Does RubixRaptor, does Remy Down Under, does any Arma creator actually own the rights to Arma? No, they don't own authorship, right? They might potentially own their copy, or they might own a key to be able to access, or a license and or key to access the copy that they have, right? For as long as that key is active. However, sorry, I was going somewhere with that. I'm trying to balance multiple points here. However, it does, authorship isn't there, you can go in, it's just free publicity, right? There are companies who will, what happened recently, I think it was it Sarue, VTuber, her VODs, I guess, ended up getting struck by Sony Music for playing Bloodborne. And all of us know Bloodborne's reputation as, wow, why don't you just make this game? Well, you say you don't have games. Have you considered making Bloodborne only for legal? And don't get me wrong, that's the thing. That's where the nitty gritty of legal comes into play, right? If they do own the trademark, if they do own the copyright, they do retain full authorship to do what they will, even if they don't necessarily own the authorship, right? Like, for example, if I'm reacting to this and RubixRaptor requests that this gets taken down, right? I'll take it down, no questions asked, right? My only concern with any time I react to a video, as long as it is the creator itself or somebody on behalf of the creator, I'll just take it down. But then you get into the nitty gritty of if someone else did it, and he asked, they'd be looked at as kind of a dick, right? But that doesn't stop them, because there's not really a legal basis there. But then again, YouTube's also an interesting landscape, because even if you don't own the actual legal rights, we've seen the system actually get abused in terms of copyright and claims and strikes sent that may or may not have they shouldn't have been sent in the first place, potentially, right? So I do like the scripting. I do think that adds a lot more to the modularity. It adds another layer of depth, right? 1D, 2D, 3D, 4D. I think that it adds an actual dimension of depth to it, and I think that's really cool. This leads into a bridge between this and the next point in regards to lawsuits. So we know that lawsuits happen, right? If you're in business, it's going to happen. Lawsuit, right? You are infringing on our right here. You are. We don't agree with what you're doing here. We're going to file a lawsuit against you here because we did not like X, or we maybe want the money from that. It makes me wonder if it's public information, right? Because I'm sure there's lawsuits that get filed all the time, right? It would not surprise me if Call of Duty would have filed against Battlefield, right? Like say or EA, right? Let's say EA when Titanfall comes out and Call of Duty comes out with Infinite Warfare. It would not have surprised me if EA tried to attempt to file a lawsuit against Activision, right? Now, do I have information that happened? No, absolutely not. Would it make sense? Probably. Because remember, a lawsuit can be filed for any reason, right? Like someone can just, like Coffee Zone Logan Paul, right? Filing for defamation, right? It just happens. And then you have to go through the court process, see if it can get dismissed. I mean, that's a whole conversation itself, right? So this makes me wonder if some of the assets in there, such as the the top secret document asset, or if other companies were just like, well, hold up, you're doing this first-person style shooter game, and that's similar to our first-person style shooter game, makes me wonder if lawsuits were filed. And we'll segue into the next section where we have I think it's really cool that procedural generation, adding yet another layer of complexity, another dimension to the modularity. I think that it works great for operations like he mentioned, like Warhammer 40K. I think that that's super cool. Not only do they have scripting, but also procedural generation. I mean, there's got to be some coding wizardry going on there, but for all intents and purposes, that's really damn cool. I don't see other games with that. So, I mean, having a 40K operation in which you're, I don't know, having 1,000 Suns versus Ultramarines, you got Helldrakes flying around and stuff, I think it'd be super cool. But then that leads into what I deemed as legal demanded company non-compliance, where there's people who want more 40K games, right? We all want more 40K. So if we have Arma, where we have modders able to use, Warhammer to be able to have a procedurally generated, 1,000 Suns versus Ultramarines, have we seen potentially like Games Workshop come down? We know Games Workshop historically has come down on things like Edinburgh text-to-speech. We know they've come down trying to win a lawsuit in regards to miniatures gameplay thing, right? Which they did lose. So it makes me want, and I think I'm picking on Games Workshop here. I want to clarify that like there's other things here, right? Especially when you have when I specifically like demand and non-compliance, right? How many of us want more Halo product, right? I enjoyed Halo Infinite Space Campaign. I'm sad we're not getting that Destiny style DLC for any more story. So me as somebody who wants more Halo game is kind of just left out in the air, and I hate the netcode of Halo Infinite. So the demand is there, and when I say company non-compliance, it's that, well, what about this, right? What about wanting another more Halo campaign? Or Games Workshop, well, there's clearly demand for, say, I don't know, maybe being able to play Eldari, or maybe playing League of Votan, right? I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, in a military sim like this, right? What Warhammer, so Total War 3, right? Where's Warhammer Total War 3, right? Or, sorry, 40K Total War 3. Which I guess Creative Assembly is allegedly potentially working on. But in absence of something, people are going to default to that. So when we look at, right, if we look at my copy of Pokemon Red that's in my, not my pocket analog, what's this? Game Boy Operator, right? That I just plug into my PC via USB-C. It's legit hardware, right? It's a legitimate copy of Pokemon Red, but it's no longer, but the 3DS eShop is down. It's not being sold first party by Nintendo. What if I wanted to play something along the lines of what was Seth Talk's game, Warlords Battlecry 3? What happens if it wasn't on GOG or Steam, right? Like, we start running into an issue where there's clearly demand. People want to play Pokemon Red. People want to play Warlords Battlecry 3. But if no one's offering it, right? So where are you supposed to get this? Like a third party scalper? Are you supposed to, do the funny P word on the internet? Well, legally, you can't do that, right? And legally, I do have to advise, make sure you have legitimate carts. Make sure if you are doing something like emulation, to, dump legitimate copies and follow all proper protocol. I have to advise that from a legal standpoint. But, like, this all circles back into the demanded company non-compliance. I would argue, yes, while they own authorship of the IP, if you're squatting on it, like the Nemesis system from Middle-earth Shadow War and Shadow of Mordor, right? How long has it been since we saw the last game? They're still squatting on the Nemesis system. Sony's still squatting on Bloodborne. People want more Bloodborne content. So I like that they're I'm sure that there's like some nitty-gritty into retaining ownership of Arma from Bohemian Rhapsody in the terms of service in regards to mods, right? I'm sure absolutely there's some things in there from a legal standpoint. It's very cool to see things like Warhammer in here. It's very cool to see things like Halo in here because the mods do, for all intents and purposes, go really hard. And it is filling that demand that a lot of companies aren't willing to they're just not willing to fulfill, right? I'm sure you could script an entire Halo Wars campaign in Arma 3, and that's honestly really cool. You could probably do a more of an interactive Total War Warhammer 3, right? You could probably do a more interactive version of that, like more FPS and less like RTS kind of thing. In Arma 3, and I like that the engine is built for that, and also the rolling dice, right? More into that D&D mindset. So you do have a lot of tools at your disposal, and I do like that about this. So the legal standpoint definitely interests me. It's probably not public information. It does make me wonder how many companies have attempted to sue them for random reasons, potential copyright infringement, especially Games Workshop. As much as they see, the joke is that Games Workshop hates their community. I mean, that's the joke, right? Nervous laughter. So it's just one of those interesting things. Zeus as well. Zeus, very, very interesting, especially added post-launch. I think that's a rather fascinating point. It adds another dimension to the modularity. It adds a little more depth. It does allow you to really fulfill that role of the DM, like he's saying. I think that was a perfect way to encapsulate that, and I really like the concept of Zeus, and I wish more games had something like this. I think you could make some really cool games with this as a mechanic, and this kind of flies in face of the philosophy of modern AAA, especially when, well, what we're going to give you content for free. Well, and we have games like Helldivers, right? Helldivers 2 give you content for free, which is fine. Yes, you have your war bonds, you have your paid stuff, and that feeds into the free to play stuff kind of thing. It's just very interesting to. I feel like this is just a game from a different era, because it just makes you realize how kind of bullshiza, we'll use that word, the modern AAA industry is. It really is depressing, and it really does come across as bleak for modern gaming. Like, it's, oh god, I don't think we would see something like this in modernity. It reminds me of the director from games like Space Marine 2. I guess more or less I'd say it was from like Left 4 Dead 2, right? How they had the director like, oh, you're trying to stick close together, maybe we'll throw some smokers and some jockeys at you. You're doing pretty well. Let's throw a tank or a charger at you, right? That director type ask. I've always been a fan of that. I wonder how hard those are to code on the back end. I'd have to talk to somebody who's familiar with game design, familiar with scripting, but I feel that is a impressive piece of software, and I like that it does add a lot of modularity for players, feeding back into the DM aspect, knowing your group, right? If your group is more serious and wants that hardcore military operation, you may not be popping in and just, declare greatest WOG and just, run out your players, right? Probably not. Maybe you want to have some kind of lasting consequences, but if you want the hilarity, sure, Zeus on into things, assume direct control Harbinger style, and declare greatest WOG over and over and over and over again. I think there could be some fun in that. So very interesting in that. I like that we have the multi-layers, just covering that again. Mission objective, the 3 points he brought were mission objective, making the mission objectives as well as procedural generation, and then obviously plus Zeus being another dimension there. I like how it's a multifaceted piece. There's a lot of moving pieces that go into this to make it a very unique experience that I just don't see anywhere else. In regards to multiple ages, this reminds me of Pokemon, right? While we can say it's very generation focused, I would go a step further to classify things into certain eras. I would argue legacy Pokemon is going to be Gen 1 and 2 RBY GSC, right? Because they never actually went up to Game Boy Advance, and we have the Game Boy Advance DS era. That's going to be RSE, Fire Red, Leaf Green, going into Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Then once Black, White, Black 2, White 2, that's kind of I would argue, and I would say that's legacy. I would say RBY GSC is going to be historic, and then you go into kind of semi-modern, which is going to be X, Y, ORAS, Sun and Moon, Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon. Now we have kind of modern Pokemon, which is going to be Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee, Scarlet, Violet, Sword and Shield, right? But you can see how there's kind of eras throughout there, and you see the design philosophy shift a little bit, and it's not necessarily as cut and dry as per games, but like I like that there's the eras to this, and I also like to mention back to, this is kind of what we're going to default to. I'm sure there's someone who absolutely loves Arma 2's creator, don't get me wrong, but just hearing, we're going to stick to Arma 3, just for ease of access coding and stuff like that. Very, very cool. The Eden updates the significant terrain. I don't remember the point I was making on that, but the fact that Eden gets as many updates as it does is actually really fascinating, because once again, I mean, that would 100% be a DLC in modern time, if not a separate game entirely, right? I mean, they would charge you up the wazoo for that in the modern AAA. Like, can you imagine someone like Blizzard Activision doing that? Can you imagine someone like Blizzard Activision giving you like a map maker for Diablo 2? I think Diablo 2 Resurrected is probably one of their better products right now from my limited playtime with it. But like, it remains, right? Can you imagine them giving you a map editor free of charge? Can you imagine you giving them extra tools free of charge? I can't imagine that for AAA. I can't imagine anyone like I was going to say Bungie. But like, yeah, Bungie, like Destiny, I don't see them doing anything like that, especially when they take away weapon crafting, right? I don't see anyone like Microsoft being able to do that with Halo because they can't even give us a game right now, which hence why we get into, you know, non-compliance from companies with the IPs that they clearly own, you know, not meeting demand with any supply. This is why we go into Arma 3 Halo, right? To get those needs that Microsoft never seems to be able to scratch. Like, it's so good. Micro macro group obviously goes back to DM depending on what group you're running. You know, if you have a small group, you know, a little bit more of a tight-knit community, you're able to do different things. But if you're, you know, have this macro group, you know, you have mag-style gameplay, 128v128, or depending, I don't even know what the player cap is. Let's say 500v500, if that's even possible, right? There's going to be different needs and different things you take into consideration with something like that, and especially a lot of processing and computing power. So knowing your group, but anyone who's played D&D will know that, you know, be a good DM. A good DM will adjust to the needs of their players and not necessarily push what they want to do. PvE and PvP, I like that this game encapsulates both. There are definitely going to be PvE players. There's going to be PvP players. Absolutely, there's going to be both players in this, which is actually really fantastic because sometimes games can and will leave you high and dry if your needs aren't getting met, right? I'm sure there's people who were playing Destiny 2 Crucible, and, you know, Crucible gets inundated with cheaters, MMR gets in whack, you go into trials, and you get aimbotted back to back to back to back to back, and you're like, F this game, I'm not going to play Crucible, right? I'm not going to play trials. Then you go play something like Call of Duty, or maybe go play Warframe or something like that, right? I like that there is the modularity, not only in terms of how you make the game, how you play the game, but in regards to it can cater to both a PvP and PvE audience, depending on what the person wants to specifically do. Community, I don't know what I was making the point with. Just have great Grant here. I'm literally just keeping this on a notepad on my phone while I'm going through this video. Community's great for all intents and purposes. Clearly, there's a bunch of big channels. We have people like Remy Down Under who do Arma videos as well. I imagine Russian Badger would have a lot of fun in Arma 3. The community seems like it might have the Warhammer effect going where, you know, the people who actually go out and buy the minis and then, you know, glue the minis together and then paint the minis, you know, that's just a lot of upfront costs. It's not like you buy a commander deck, or it's not like, you know, you buy your 3 Fiendsmith engraver for Yu-Gi-Oh! And you buy your meta deck and you're in, right? Like, there's a little bit more that goes into that. And because there's a little bit of an upfront barrier, not only cost-wise, but time-wise, it tends to attract a generally more legitimate kind of person. I can definitely speak very highly of the community for everything that I've seen, at least from RubixRaptor. Balancing and being subjective, once again, be a good DM, right? If you have a smaller group, it's like, cool, yeah, maybe we should tone certain things down. Or he brought up the Imperial Guard having more than the Chaos Cultists, right? Having more armor, right? And you have to just consider, okay, do I want them to necessarily take, you know, half a dozen more las bolts, right? Probably not. Probably a good thing to kind of balance that out a little bit. And even then, if you're wanting a hyper elite squad, maybe give them a little more health, right? Like if you're trying to make Adeptus Custodes in setting and there's not really Adeptus Custodes, maybe just make Space Marine and just give them chunkier armor, right? Make them cosplay as an Ultramarine. Grats. I'm sure there's absolutely Adeptus Custodes in here. I need to go dig into the Eldarian Custodes mods, because that sounds like that'd be actually a really good time. But balancing is also subjective. Know your player group, as he said, very, very common, very common sense stuff. This reminds me of Halo Forge, as I said. I liked his point on SFM as well, Source Filmmaker. As it turns out, I know this is going to be a very controversial take. If you make a good product, people will play your game. People will engage with your game. If you just make a good product, the people will come. Like, I mean, even then, you could have Zeus locked behind. You could have Zeus locked behind DLC. You could have the terrain thing locked behind another DLC. I'm glad that they aren't. Don't get me wrong. When I say that, you know, modern AAA company, if they were to make a Arma clone, so to speak, right? Sure, they can lock some of that, but as long as the core product is good and you feel like you're respected, people will engage with the product. That's how that works. As it turns out, if you make a mean drink at the bar, people are going to return for that mean drink you make at the bar. If your wings that you make are a little zesty, a little spicy, and people like them, people will keep coming back. If you have a game that's incredibly modular, it meets and satisfies your needs. It's very welcoming when it comes to modding and tweaking things to make quality of life better, to make really cool projects and operations. Wow. Interesting that people would continue to come back and play. Really interesting, right? So, in more or less words, those are my thoughts on that segment. Oh my god, we're only 50 minutes into the video.
The first mod that I want to cover is Operation Trebuchet, a full conversion Halo mod developed by the Passion Studio Article 2. This mod brings to life not just one Halo game, but an array of assets from the entire franchise. For example, you can play as a Halo 3 Marine, drive the Sun Devil from Halo Ground Command, or use one of the dozens and dozens of guns from the mainline games. OpTray is an enormous mod. The amount of talented work this group of modders has put into this project is probably deserving of an hour-long video essay on its own. And since I am a masochist, I decided to place as many assets as I could find from the mod into one place. This is terrifying to look at, and something I brought up to one of the lead developers of the project.
You know, it's got a lot of crap in it.
There's a lot.
We're on it for maybe too long.
It's a declarative statement, but like, I feel like the OpTray asset folder is like bigger than an individual Halo game.
I mean, we could go look right now. The current working directory size of the Operation Trebuchet distro, like the GitHub, is 70 gigabytes. So yeah,
Yeah?
it's about the size
that
of
is
a modern
game
AAA
size.
game.
Now, given all these assets, you can do a lot with it. Off the top of my head, we've dropped from orbit as ODSTs, fought with Spartans on the Glassing of Arcadia, and dealt with the flood at Installation 04. We've also defended Earth in the city of New Mombasa and violently evaded taxes as the insurrectionists in the Aradna system. The amount of stuff that these mods let you do has fulfilled pretty much every single one of my daydreams for Halo, besides maybe fighting the brutes. There's no brutes yet. However, there's like everything else. I could go into about 1,000 different things about this mod, but in the hope of not having a video length to rival Pyrocynicals, I'm going to focus on two. One of the most impactful things about this mod is the Spartans, and for that matter, the elites. It's lost on us, or at least me, who haven't been tortured by Arma's code base, but to actually create a playable 8-foot tall powered armor superhuman is a terrible amount of work. These aren't normal models, so they had to completely design its own skeleton for the game. That also means recreating every animation for them, from shooting to even sitting in a car. And in fact, the dark magic to create one in the first place was like lost lore in the modding community for a while, which was brought up in the interview.
I think at the start we had kind of just accepted, like off rip, that the idea of Covenant and Arma was basically impossible. That it was like kind of infeasible. So we didn't even really entertain the idea of doing that for the longest time. It wasn't until we had people like all but begging us to let them join the team and work on Covenant. We were like, okay, fine. Drake Darren is what the name he goes by, like Discord. I am a firm believer that like Covenant as they exist now would not be a thing if not for that man. He pretty much single-handedly made the elite and all that like a reality through a sheer force of will and French determination.
I want to ask you about the Spartan custom skeleton, because I remember you faintly mentioning at some point it was the same person that also did the Space Marine custom skeleton.
It was, which I wasn't made aware of until much later after he had done it. But that guy apparently is like a fey wizard trickster or something, because apparently what happened, and I got all this like way after the fact, after years of wondering what the hell happened. But apparently he showed up one day to the TIOW team and was like, you know, like a dark jester in the night, was like, I have this magic way of making this thing you've always dreamed of. Made it, didn't explain it at all, and then disappeared. TIOW actually does genuinely have like 40k lore
actual lost technology. Yeah,
they don't know how to mess with that Space Marine skeleton. I shouldn't say that with such authority on like a fucking YouTube.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure
they're gonna come and be like, actually, idiot, we can. You're stupid.
Yeah, I'm sure they've cracked some part of that shell, because like Web Knight's like melee mod introduces custom
they would have
skeletons
had
and
to.
whatnot.
But I do know for the longest time, like nobody else knew how to do it, and it's the same boat with us up until pretty much until Web Knight started doing stuff where he made that, was around for about a year, and then one day just stopped posting. Doesn't reply to any DMs.
Does anyone know where he is, or is he just gone?
No clue. The word on the grapevine I have heard is that apparently goes by a new name and is working on a new mod now. I'm just gonna let that dog lie. I don't. He's done his service to the mod. I'm happy. I don't need him
Yeah.
come back if he doesn't
What a
want
dude.
to.
Now is probably a good time to mention my other point, which is that Optray is not the only Halo mod, and that there's a few that contribute to create a perfect experience. The first one that's obviously worth mentioning is Web Knight's Optray expansion. This completely reworked how the elites act and made them perform just like you might expect from a mainline Halo game. It also added grunts and hunters to bring the Covenant roster into a fleshed out state for PvE. Fun fact on these also, if I remember right, Scorch, one of the devs for Optray, took Web Knight and had him play through all of the Halo games because he never had, and that's part of the reason that this mod exists. Another mod that adds a bunch was called Precursors, a mod developed in part by Devour King, which adds Flood to the game, which was incredible when it came out. It's my favorite enemy to fight in the Halo universe, and to do so in Arma with like 80 of your friends was incredible. The last awesome mod I wanted to mention was Mizraya Armories, or Mizraya Armor. I have never been able to pronounce that fictional gun manufacturer's name, and I'm not going to start today. Regardless, this team's work adds a lot of very high quality armors and textures that I just can't get over how good they are. There's also the mod team associated with the first MAU, a Halo Arma group. They have added absolutely fantastic things to the game, like for example, the Sentinels from Forerunner facilities or Covenant ships. More and more, we find that we're always using their mod when we play Halo, and I'm just thankful there's another amazing talented team contributing to this awesome universe. And this is also partly to say this is a vital aspect of full conversion in Arma. It is very common for there to actually be multiple mod teams and projects that can all be used together to create amazing stuff. This is especially true with the Warhammer 40k side of things, but we'll get to that in a second, because the last thing I wanted to touch on was terrain.
Not terrain. Oh no. As it turns out, terrain's really good. This just makes me frustrated at Microsoft more and more, if I'm being completely honest, because like, so from a legal standpoint, right? Microsoft is going to continue to own the assets, right? They're going to continue to own the IP, right? They're going to hold on to that with an iron death grip, and reasonably so. But that being said, like, we clearly have such great Arma projects. The GitHub was, you know, at time of him making this video, is 70 gigabytes, right? So I install everything on MCC, every game, including extra language pack, and it's like 120 gigabytes somewhere up in there, right? That's like half of that game for asset packs. You kidding me? I will absolutely use something like that in terms of a modular experience to create something like that. Absolutely. Which does, once again, bring up the legal argument of, is distributing these assets necessarily legal? What happens if these assets are made from the ground up? But obviously the IP could be still being infringed upon. It's interesting. Once you get into the legal, and I want to clarify, I talk about legal so much because it's something I have to deal with every day. Random Bull Shenaniganery Part 9 for the bit that Soviet Womble sang got copyright claimed and upheld, so I had to go trim the section out, right? Like there's nothing I can really do. Especially when it comes to making sure my channel is in the clear, because I hate dealing with copyright, if I'm being completely honest. I have to become mini, not lawyer, to do my job for all intents and purposes in certain aspects, especially because of how much content that I put out, right? But it does make me wonder where this falls legally, or maybe if this is a don't ask, don't tell, kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't be a jerk about this kind of thing, right? It would make total sense. And honestly, that being said, I mean, clearly this seems all above board, because, you know, it's still up. It's still, I could go to the GitHub. Pretty sure I could still get this, and I could probably make my own Halo mission no time at all once I follow some tutorials, which honestly, this is inspiring me to do. This is actually making me want to actually make sure I have Arma 3 installed. That would be worth the primo solid state space. Distribution as well, because it's not Arma. I wonder if legally Arma finds itself in a weird gray area, because for all intents and purposes, it's like, what do you go after, Arma? Well, hey, we have this Arma 3 Halo mod right here, or hey, we have these Space Marine models from 40k in Arma. Okay, bro, it's not us. What do you want from me? I could also see that being another side of that, and it's probably Occam's razor. The simple solution is generally the most generally what it is, right? So it could be that because it's being distributed by a third party and it's not Arma themselves, they could find themselves some sort of legal immunity with that. But then again, I don't know. Once again, you can really sue over anything as long as you have enough money, whether that is valid or not. You can at least attempt to get the process going. The models are a time investment too. This kind of goes back into what I was saying about 40k, just having kind of a higher quality player base, because you have to, you know, buy your models, build your models, paint your models, even if you 3D print your models, right? Being able to take the time and print them. I personally haven't met too many people who 3D printed it, as I usually go to like a Games Workshop store, specifically a Warhammer store, but it's Games Workshop. Never met a salty person there yet. It's always quite clean there when I go. Just feels better than going to some LGSs I've been to where you definitely have that Magic player smell. Magic players, I'm sorry, it definitely has a smell. You probably know which side of the community that is too. So it's interesting though. It's interesting to look at. There's a lot of time investment that goes into this, and there's a lot of quality here. A lot of quality, which I don't see in a lot of other mods. We have people making interesting mods for Skyrim all the time. As it turns out, you make a good product, people will keep engaging with the product into spending massive amounts of time on the product because they enjoy the product. Like, that's how that works. Take notes, Bungie and Destiny 2, in terms of player retention. The Lost Tech is also a good one to honestly think about, where dude just shows up, hi, I have how the elites work, does some magic and then just disappears. It's really cool that these people exist out there. It's one of those that I consistently cite, that the masters in any craft are the people who don't even do it anymore. Allegedly, I think this was back in Ruby and Sapphire. I'd have to remember what era it was. I know Wasi VGC, or not Wasi, Wasi, Pokemon TCG YouTuber, he was talking about it. I love his content. He's talking about how some kid just showed up to Worlds one year out of nowhere and won Worlds, never played the game again, potentially, allegedly. So yeah, like the people who, or like how modern pro Call of Duty players would absolutely get clapped by the old guard, right? Things like that. So it's really cool just to see an example of somebody who's just like, I have this skill set, and then does the thing. How did you do it? My job is done. And then just like, I almost said Moon Knight. Oh my God, what's the Sailor Moon meme? Tuxedo masks away. My job here is done. But wait a minute, you did the thing, and then he just jumps out the window. I think it's really great. I'm actually looking forward to this terrain section. I want to see what he has to say on terrain, making it its own section.
Terrains, or maps in Arma, are Leviathans. The default map for Arma 3, Altus, is 268 square kilometers wide. Goes without saying, that is very big. Also, it's one of the main draws to the Arma series, as you can truly have massive spanning wars and battles. However, when it comes to making them, it's a lot of work, which only makes the terrains in Optre all the more impressive. One of the main people who made them being a developer known as Nightovizard, also one of my favorite terrain creators in Arma that I also had the privilege to interview.
As you know, I've mostly worked on terrains. Some of you already know about, like Madrigal and Arcadia, Colo,
Yeah, they're awesome.
Halo Ring maps. I've also done some Star Wars maps for Legion specifically.
That's cool.
Yeah, the Legion.
Ender, for example, it was actually my first for Star Wars. I've also done that orangey Geonosis map.
Still a great map.
So,
very orange.
Yeah, well, in Arma, it's quite hard to do because it's all numbers and it's all config. So you don't have any preview of what you are doing. So you need to do some maths pretty hard to get it right, honestly. The user interface for the Arma 3 tools are
they're old. Yeah, I mean...
They have a very archaic look. When Arma 3 was announced, I was already quite excited because I played a lot of Arma 2, so Arma 3 looked like a much better game. 2014, many mods started appearing, and Optre was one of them. So when I saw that Halo, game of my childhood that I spent a lot of hours into, was coming to Arma, I said, okay, I have to learn how to do something. We had no information, no documentation. Almost nobody had experience with the tools in Arma 3. So 2015 or 16, I contacted someone from the Optra dev team. I think it was Lumnuon. He was making some of the Optra maps, for example, Iberus and Block Gulch. And one afternoon, they just called me and showed me a little bit of the process and clarified me some of the things I had questions for. 1 year later, 2 years later, I had Madrigal finished.
I think Madrigal is super special because it's one of the few maps that blends open terrains with a city. Like the Madrigal city itself is very unique, combined with the surrounding areas of it, kind of make it a one-of-a-kind Arma map.
I had so many different ideas for an Arma terrain, or for different Arma terrain. Let's just put everything into one map. City, okay, let's do it. Underwater ruins, okay, let's do it too. Fortresses, okay, let's just go and do a D-Day outpost. When I started working on it, I had many issues. The object placement for terrains, we didn't have Eden back in the day.
Oh, I mission make
that's
in
wild.
Arma 2. So the 2D editor, that was awful.
You get the idea.
Yeah.
That's why you will notice that many things in that map are not really placed very well, and some are floating, and it's very hard to fix because I have to go around and look for them. And at the end, I moved on. Madrigal, I don't know if you saw the old one, but when it comes to textures, it has changed a lot over the years.
Installation 04 is also a fantastic map.
I use a new tool for terrain making for installation 04, and it was mostly for natural environments. When I saw the results that tool gave me, I the first thing I thought is I have to do the Halo Ring map.
Yeah, I noticed that for the texturing of that map, you can kind of see like water flow patterns in the actual like hillsides and whatnot.
Yeah, way more complex to use, but I spent a lot of time with it, and I managed to get something that looked a bit more realistic and more interesting. Personal favorite terrain, I think Harvest is shaping to be my favorite terrain, maybe.
Oh, and that's one you're working on right now, right?
I'm still working on it right now.
Awesome.
And not as interesting as Madrigal in terms of locations. In overall looks, it looks pretty nice.
Obviously, it was awesome to interview Night of Wizard. Fun fact, he also did a ton of textures for Optrade, like the Warthog and whatnot, which I think is definitely worth mentioning. I do think that wraps up our wonderful jaunt through the Halo part of Arma. So finally moving on and returning to the theme that a lot of Arma modding experiences come from a wide variety of talented teams' hard work, let's talk about Warhammer.
I saw a rainbow at midnight.
I do like that the terrain goes into Warhammer because obviously terrain Warhammer, ha 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 ha, right? Spelled J-A-J-A-J-A-J-A. Those that know. All my homies use H-A-H-A-H-A, but I use J-A-J-A-J-A. So good. I do think that there's something to be said about the quality of maps. I mean, like this individual, like making such really cool maps like that, like the blended city one here, it was Madrigal, right? So good. Like that is, you don't really see that in modern gaming. I mean, I think maybe it's because I'm so, I wanted to say AAA pilled, but I feel like that's the wrong term. It's because we have games like modern Assassin's Creed games. We have like was it how Moist Critical worded? I think it was Star Wars Outlaws. Oh, it's a generic Ubisoft open world game, right? When that's like, we have open world games like Oblivion. We have open world games like Skyrim. We have many open world games that people do love. We have games where Dragon's Dogma 2, a lot of people didn't like how big the map was. Sure, there were teleport things you could grind later on. I'm sure there's huge diehard fans of Dragon's Dogma 2 as well. I've heard a lot of people just unfortunately did not like the size of the map. Where we keep getting scoped into larger and larger maps. Is there anything that's filling the map? So I think Elden Ring was a good example of good map design. Because, yeah, there were pockets that were empty, but reasonably, you run into a giant, and it's not like you're pulling him over into another encounter, right? Like, I had to have it justified that they're spaced out enough that each enemy can be its own encounter and not overlap into another. So the world and also in regards to lands between, right? I mean, like, not every inch of it's going to be like RuneScape 3, right? Where you exit Lumbridge and you have the beach area that's behind it, and then you go over to Port Sarim, and then you have like the funny port portal and stuff. Like old school RuneScape was one of those, like, it felt really chill. Like there was space between Lumbridge and Draenor, and then space between Draenor and Port Sarim, a little bit swept out of that wall. But you go into RuneScape 3, and it feels like the map kind of has condensed itself because, oh my god, there's so much stuff now. So it's just interesting. I the quality of maps I wanted to note very specifically, as well as its trend in the face of modern AAA gaming, because it feels like we're getting more and more haphazard open world slot maps when we have people who are actually able to put passion into the games and make such amazing maps, right? Dude also put like textures on like the Warthog and stuff. Like, what a cool dude who's just super passionate about it, right? I do like that he brings up that played Halo from his childhood. I titled it like RubixRaptor did earlier, right? Titled this video coincidentally, the game that can make your dreams come true, right? Dude just wanted to, when without Eden, right, going into Arma 3, just like, I want to make maps for Halo and stuff, right? And how many of us have wondered, right? Like, how many of us have wondered, like in Wind Waker, what's beyond the borders of the Great Sea? Obviously, we know that there's a boundary there. If you go too far outside that boundary, the game's going to say, hey, you can't go out that way. There's a skybox there. I'm sure there's going to be an edge at some point, right? But like, we know that the world is smaller than it was. But you go back and say, look at Ocarina of Time, and you look up at Death Mountain, right? And you're just like, oh man, that's really cool. And you had to like use your imagination. That's really what I come back down to. Older Pokemon as well, right? Yeah, and I've talked about this a number of times. You walk into Pewter City, and there's 3 houses, a museum, and a Pokemon gym, Pokemon Mart, and a Pokemon Center, right? We know what tile sets are there. We know, what leads where. We know how the game interacts with itself. But then you look at like the anime or something like that, and Pewter City is just a giant stone gym, right? Cerulean City is the sisters' swimming concert hall, right? And you had to really use your imagination. I think that why this is relevant to this conversation about making maps and environments in the game of your dreams is that you have the ability in Arma to kind of explore outside of the box, right? I'm sure if you were able to fill this up with water, right, potentially, I'm sure that maybe you could honestly do a pretty neat Arma 3 Zelda mod. And when Din, Nehru, and Furore drowned Hyrule to deal with Ganon, right? You could probably have that as an Arma op, 100%. And I think that would go pretty hard. You have scripts that sequence themselves out to actually fill things up with water. As we see a tower here, I mean, you could maybe have a pillar of water that goes up pretty high. I don't know how that works on the processing end. And this is also one of those things that, sure, I can come up with potential ideas, but is that necessarily going to work in the engine, right? That's another concern as well. So obviously there are engine limitations, but like you can do cool things. You could probably make Hyrule in this, right? You could be like, yeah, we're going to walk from Kakariko Village all the way up to Death Mountain, and then we're going to go return back, and we go along that river all down to Zora's Hall and stuff like that. Or in Halo, right? You can have I'm pretty sure there has been an op, a simultaneous Battle of Reach op, right? Where you're halfway, you're across the planet. Maybe you're in the polar ice caps, and maybe you're fighting some zealots trying to on a mission there to recover some artifacts, some headcanon stuff, right? And you're just a group of Spartans that go in, and maybe you have increased armor and health. Like, it allows dreams to come true. It allows you to think outside the confines of this is your play area. It also allows you to populate a world as much as necessary to make it feel livable. I'm sure you can put a number of NPCs in here to simulate towns and stuff like that. I'm sure it's absolutely possible. So it allows you to populate the areas that need to be populated, but not populate the areas that don't need to be populated. And I wonder if there's some kind of scripting, either protocol or something that allows you to despawn NPCs if you are far enough away from it. So for example, if you have a town in the middle of the map, right, and it's supposed to be this hyper-populated city center, but everyone kind of moves outside of that radius, I wonder if they can just depopulate where they stood. I don't know how that works. I don't know how that's namely working on like server load. That's working on processing. Like this is all above my pay grade because I mean, I'm trying to run before I even can crawl in terms of Arma. Let's put it that way, right? Just something I wanted to bring up. This also is interesting to consider with the future of Arma as well, because we have we have Eden's update. We had the terrain feature update, right? Like we have a lot of updates and stuff. So this makes me wonder if Arma 3, depending on Reforgers, I don't know enough about Reforger right now. If Arma 3 is kind of the de facto experience, and let's say they do a 180 tomorrow, let's say Bohemia Interactive becomes the next Activision Blizzard, right? And they start charging for asset packs, they start doing season passes, FOMO, where you can miss certain assets and miss certain things if you didn't get that season pass. Like, they started doing that, and like things like Eden updates and stuff, terrain updates, those would be paid DLC. I wonder if people would just default back to Arma 3. I almost feel like this is one of those situations where as long as like the company's legit, which it seems like it's legit still, right? Absolutely, this isn't going to be a problem. But if there's that hyper corporatization, especially if we have public trading and a bunch of shareholders, because once again, I love how everyone talks about CEOs, but nobody talks about shareholders ruining games. It's really odd. Like they go full in shitification status, right? Like you're saying, chat. Would Arma 3 just be the default? And that being said, that gets into the whole, I said, I don't know if Arma requires a separate login. I'd have to literally boot it up. I don't know if this is, you have to have a specific like a Bohemia account, or if you actually do own the game in some capacity. Because if you can own the game and get it through like GOG, I will just buy Arma 3 again. You kidding me? I will get that EXE if it exists, but I don't know if that's how it exists. So it's interesting to think about the future of Arma. If full AAA and shitification happened, what the end result's going to be with that, what can happen, what could happen, what will happen, right? Because if Bohemia Interactive is just super legit company still, am I saying necessarily get everything for free? I mean, if they really do a massive campaign update and they feel it's worth their money, I mean, I'm not necessarily against them charging for it, but then again, I'm also not in the community, therefore I'm not allowed to really have an opinion on that, right? I think that from modern AAA standards, this is an absolute like 10 out of 10 in terms of a business model. Like, oh my god. So it's interesting, especially if there are battle passes happening for things like this as well. I like that this has been pretty it's its own identity. People like Arma for a reason. Now, going off terrain, let's get into the spicy one. And this is the one that makes me wonder about Games Workshop and potential legal.
Nowadays, it is very rare in Arma to join a modded event that has less than 5 mods being used. For Warhammer stuff, that is especially true. Let's take this event where we are playing as the Mechanicus as an example. In this freeze frame alone, we have Space Marines from TIOW, an Armiger from WK Knights, a tank from Imperial Conquest, a Skitarii from Grimdark Armories, Tech Priest from Treaty of Olympus, Sword and Shield from Improved Melee System and Age of Darkness, Skitarii weapons from Grimdark and Machine Spirit, all while being played on a terrain from TIOW2. That is not even half of the mods that were used in this operation, but makes for an easy way to say that experiencing the Warhammer universe is a collaborative experience modding-wise. It's also at this point that I want to shout out another YouTuber that goes by Poncha that has already delved into the Warhammer side of Arma modding, as well as interviewed a bunch of those teams. I'm not going to be interviewing a lot of them for that reason, but if you are interested, I'll have his video linked in the description. Going back to the arsenal of mods available for Warhammer, just like Halo, it's given us the ability to create an unimaginable number of amazing scenarios. It is also a long list, so brace yourself, here I go. We have played as the Tau against Khorne cultists, the Elysian drop troops killing the Brotherhood of Sek, of course the Cadians on about a dozen planetary battles, Tzeentch cultists opening a hell portal on a swamp planet, Talarn armored guard, Thunder running across a desert world, the Dark Angels hunting down traitor Space Marines, the Hurricane Warhawks disabling orbital guns, a feudal regiment reinforcing Imperial Knights, the Krieg in the Siege of Vrax, the Valhallans hunting Gene Stealers in the sewers, Ultramarines recreating Dawn of War, the Iron Warriors sieging the Imperial Fist killing Iron Warriors, and of course, Orcs being killed by the Bosnian Knight. I'm going to stop there, one, because I need to breathe, but also that I am realizing that I can keep going. I have had incredible fun with these mods. One event that always sticks out to me is when we had multiple platoons of dozens and dozens of tanks participating in such a large armored field battle that it felt like the air was vibrating.
That's great.
Dude, I have a constant, like, thunder is shaking in my headset. It all really is just so breathtaking, and of course I would not be doing it justice if I didn't shout out some of these specific projects responsible for it. The first one that comes to mind is There Is Only War, or TIOW. As far as I can remember, they were the first big project to start bringing Warhammer to life, and I think their lineage can be traced all the way back to Flashpoint, if I am remembering correctly. The amount of assets in their creative library, much like Optre, rivals AAA games, and I honestly can't think of the last Warhammer event we've done that didn't use their mod. Also, if you're interested in that mod, I know they continued development of it through a separate mod called TIOW2. That also segues me into another fantastic mod, which is Imperial Conquest. The quality of assets for this one are fantastic, and their take on iconic vehicles like the Chimera is super refreshing to me, although they've definitely gotten pushback about expressing creative liberties with an established IP, as was expressed to me in an interview I had with Rogue, one of the creators of it.
So it was one of our design mottos, trying to make everything look like it can function.
Yeah, the Chimeras, I love the Chimeras in ICP. They're definitely different than what you see on like a box of Warhammer figurines. But I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, where like they look like an actual war vehicle in ICP. So I'm assuming that's where some of the community strife is coming from.
Yeah, same happened with the Demon Rust, to the point where you actually started making changes to bring it more in line, and that happened quite a few times. But at the same time, you know, it's 40k. I'm going back.
Oh boy, what you working on?
New mod. There's a wonderful game called Space Marine 2, and the Cadians are looking mighty fine. It's not announced yet. If I announce it, and then people will flood my DMs, which is unfortunate.
Do you want me to not include that in the video?
I don't mind. I don't really mind.
Of course, other mods that come to mind are Refortification, Culvero's Factions, and Grimdark Armories, Department Minatorum, and like a dozen or so other mods that a lot of the time are required to make the experience whole. There's also, of course, the Greenskins mod, along with the Imperial Knights, all of which has been created by our local code magician, Web Knight. The design on these knights are incredible, from their custom heads-up display to strength, their defense and armaments, even their melee interaction. It is truly amazing that we have this as a free mod in our community, and I can't stop playing with this mod. I believe that's also my cue to talk about Web Knight, because this dude is a force of nature. I of course interviewed him, but I also wanted to quickly go over his repertoire because it is terrifying. As I've mentioned, he's made the Knights, the Greenskins, and Optre expansion, but he's also made an entire melee system for Arma. This is the last game I expected to have a sword fight in, but through manifestation, Web Knight has made it so. And on top of that, it's a really cool system that just keeps getting updated. Going off of the melee system, he's also made Jedi with force powers and lightsabers included. He's also added melee to Warhammer Space Marines, Spartans, and even the Half-Life Combine. Good time to mention, he has an entire Half-Life mod with a fully playable roster of Combine and Striders, which again, fantastic game experience. He's made a suite of droids for Star Wars, a custom parkour system, and an exosuit mod, as well as several sound and quality of life mods for the game. Not stopping there, he's also made an entire flight and combat system inspired off of Ace Combat and Project Wingman, flamethrower systems, weapon mods, and even a zombie and monster mod, which includes some true aberrant terrors. This dude also has a bunch of terrifying unreleased projects, which who knows if they'll ever see the light of day, but man, some of them are scary. He's also made a few terrains, but at this point, what can he not do? And on that note, let's get into the interview with him because it was a treat. Like, you have 5 pages on the workshop. I'm just gonna go over some highlights real quick.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Jay, I gotta show you something.
Oh.
That's 5 pages of stuff that you can see, right? For me, it's 8 pages.
Holy cow.
A lot of things. For me, Arma is a sandbox, like with starting with a big letter S, right? If there is something that not existing in a workshop or never meant to be in Arma, I have this like deep gremlin feeling inside of me. I'm like, I should try to put it in Arma to see if it works.
You have. I implemented a melee system, an Ace Combat flight combat system, and I mean, just the concept of an Imperial Knight is crazy.
It's hard to do melee in Arma, especially, right?
Yeah,
For example,
it seemed impossible, so I was shocked that you did it at all.
Yeah, it's like I just had an idea of like a medieval type of thing in Arma, and I was thinking that I could manage to crack the engine, and make it work. I made it work, but I would say I'm getting back to it. That will be one of my things that I want to redo. And I constantly have that struggle in me that I should make new stuff with the new things that I learned, but at the same time, I'm kind of leaving all of my old work that people are still using, and I kind of feel obligated to get back and fix it. I just treat them as my babies, right? I made them myself, right? And how could I just abandon one? You need to understand I have a crazy amount of hours in Arma.
Oh, I believe you. I believe it.
Yeah.
It's probably catastrophic.
I am ashamed of myself, right?
You should tell me your hours right now.
I'm just going to send you a little screenshot. Okay. I'm scared to pronounce that amount, all right? I have
to calculate this in days. 836 days.
Nice.
So
that is almost 3 years.
It is the only game that I can play with all of my friends at once. And there is no any other game that I can, just gather up the boys and just play with them. I need to give credit where the credit needs to be given to Arma developers, right? They made something not just amazing, right? They basically pioneered the sandbox experience. A lot of people are calling Arma 3 military sandbox or like milsim type of thing, but I would even go further and just take military out of the question. Right? Because I hosted a D&D, like an actual D&D session where players were playing as a part of the village, surviving during like a flood even on Altis. And we didn't shot a single round during that. And we were playing it for like a week. So it's not only a military thing.
Actually, a great thing to point out is you were definitely around for this period of time in Arma's life, but remember the period of life servers where that was just the main thing? Get on, roleplay a salt miner or a paramedic.
I worked with those kind of people, right?
Yeah.
Back in the day, I was doing commissions. I was animating like simple gestures, or like animations, dance animations, and stuff like that. They are still holding up, to be honest.
There are
a lot
some.
of people are still.
But it used to be like a zeitgeist, like Tim the Tatman, like top streamers, Lyric were playing Arma, and feel like a lot of them went to GTA RP, probably. That's a crazy period, like a time capsule of why Arma isn't just a military simulator.
Battle Royale was a big thing, and I remember that because the guy who made PUBG, right? It was actually PlayerUnknown Ghost Hotel Battle Royale. It was like the little thing where you spawn around a ghost hotel on Altis. It's like on the top right. I'm so cooked, man. I know the Altis map like exactly. I'm just sitting here and I know exactly.
I mean, you have spent 836 human days.
I'm ashamed of it.
Rotations of our planet on this game. The Goliath. Because that's a crazy model. How was that process going through that?
I was talking with one of the guys from the Warhammer unit, like Space Marine specifically, and they told me that Smasher, well, it's great for like regular humans. It's very dangerous, quote unquote. I scripted in a way that you can fight with it in melee, both as a human and Space Marine. And like a lot of people in his unit were just like charging Smashers and it wasn't a threat. So he wanted some kind of beast/creature that would put like a hold on like a Space Marine assault, if they're like storming, a Chaos Fortress, right? This thing appears and everybody switch focus onto that one. It's basically like a raid boss.
So good.
Oh, yeah, it is. It is devastating. I don't know if you saw the SCP Gen Zerop we did. It wiped out an entire defense point and then wasn't satisfied, so it ran to the next one and killed half of that one.
Plus Scorch putting a fucking speed up script on it. I was like, oh man, he loves to do that shit.
He does.
Yeah, so that model was bought from Sketchfab from the same guy who made Smasher. And when we looked at the poly count, it was like 500,000 polygons. And I'm like, okay, how the fuck are we supposed to make it work in Arma?
Yeah.
And so Serva came in clutch and remodeled some of the parts, as well as redid all the textures because the original OG textures are like 4K.
We're going to abruptly cut the interview there. However, he's going to return in like a few seconds because a lot of the other projects that I wanted to cover, fun fact, he also worked on. These mods are also going to continue the theme that Arma doesn't need to be played in the way that it was designed. So a great way to showcase that is a mod that turned it into a medieval adventure game. I am talking about Empires of Old, a Warhammer Fantasy mod that adds state troops, witch hunters, the undead, and even a steam tank. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the developers over in Czechia probably didn't intend for their game to be played like this. However, through the collaboration of a bunch of creative people, it is a reality. It's also funny because being able to do this was one of my greatest dreams in Arma, to keep the video theme going. And years ago, I had a miserable kit bash of mods to try to create it. However, to now have dedicated mod projects for it is outstanding. And I, of course, interviewed some of the developers for it, Web Knight included. The specific one I am going to ask about is Empires of Old, because that is some fuckery.
It is some fuckery.
that doesn't belong in Arma, and we're going to talk about it. What foul demon possessed you to make a medieval melee-focused mod in a military shooter sandbox?
I'll run you through it. So obviously we saw the videos from Ignis when you guys did the Warhammer Fantasy. Cool. Everybody's played, well, not everybody, but a lot of people played like the Total War games, and I love Total War. I think we were doing Imperial Knight stuff at the time with like the Terran group, like back when we did that joint liberation where we showed up the Imperial Knights. Yeah. And I was just like sitting there. I was like, man, it'd be kind of cool if we did fantasy in this. And so we just started getting like I have this collective of modelers in my friend group that I'm like, all right, it's time to gather. It's the mod minds. And I'm like, you make this and you make that, and then I'll texture it, and then Servo puts it in game. We weren't really expecting it to get to the point that it did, but then Webb came along and he's like, I'm going to make your enemy AI cool. And we're like, this is epic.
Yeah, because Webb worked on the Necromancer, right?
He did the Necromancer. He did the Karn Wraith.
Blood Knights are crazy. The Karn Wraith specifically, like seeing that in this dark forest, I was like, oh, That's not Arma. That's a
Yeah,
ghost.
it really feels like you're in a different game. You got all the HUD off, and you've got a sword with a melee system, and then demons are teleporting behind you. It completely changes everything.
And the flintlock. The best addition that I ever made to this game is ability to shoot your fellow guy with a fucking flintlock, with a blicky.
Is it the alternate fire for the rapier one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was that inspired off of the Vermintide Salt Spire? Attack?
Okay. As well as the fire sword. Fire Dash, I think it's called.
The Fire Dash.
It's the Sienna's ability, basically.
I had to stop most of the development after the steam tanks, and
I think it was great.
yeah, Scorch was a big help with getting the steam tank in, so that's a big thanks to him. And then obviously the cannons, which have just been completely devastating, and nobody wanted to work. And it's totally it happens. It's the Arma burnout, and you move from one genre to another. And I mean, goodness, look at the amount of mods that Web has made.
I don't want to think about it. I mean, honestly, when we play Age of or Empires of Old, it feels like a finished project. It pretty much has everything I'd want besides maybe an entire Skaven faction, but that is asking a lot.
Everybody wants Skaven, let me tell you.
Great thing to mention, but those same guys also made a Helldivers mod, most notably a Helldivers mod before Helldivers 2 came out, so we got a lot of accusations that we willed that game into existence because we created it in Arma. Moving on with doing terrible things to the Arma engine, what about turning it into an RTS? The wonderful developers over at Tiberium Genesis have answered that question, though it's worth mentioning there are multiple mods that have turned Arma into an RTS, which is once again a testament to how widely modded this game is. However, I was able to interview the people over at Tiberium Genesis, and we've played with their mod a ton, so I obviously had to go into it a little bit.
So started has this in June 2004 for the game Operation Flashpoint.
Oof.
Yeah, Flashpoint.
It's a bit ago.
2003, I did my first add-on. It was an Apocalypse tank from Red Alert 2, T80 with 2 barrels. I started first alone with my brother. It was first called Command Conquer mod for Operation Flashpoint, also CNC mod for OFP. Then I have found some other guy from the Netherlands. His name was Cheetah. He did a Titan, GDI Titan. Also Jack has joined as a mission scripter, so Jack Hammersmith. Our dream was to make a RTS and FPS mode, so that you are able to build your own base and attack the enemy base. We are still on that. We have a working energy system, a working Tiberium system with growing Tiberium fields.
Super cool that you're not just making a full conversion mod, you're also making game modes along with it.
It's building, the commander is building the base at the moment.
It rebuilds destroyed stuff, so if enemy is destroying your defenses or whatever.
That's wild. And is this wall just being built right now by the AI?
Yes.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Like, see, you can see cargo on the top, and cargo is unloaded. Animation is being played, and then I can move to the Tiberium field and harvest Tiberium.
Is there any other notes that you think were a big part why Arma 3 was your choice to mod?
Mostly the freedom to do whatever you want. So you even can do FIFA on it.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, honestly, you can do everything. You can play Predator. You can play Halo. You can play Warhammer. You play a lot of Warhammer mods. You can do mostly everything.
Moving on from that cool stuff, I think the last universe I want to cover in terms of full conversion mods is the universe of Star Wars. This one's important because it was not only one of the first universes to be converted and really become popular in Arma, but it also has an interesting relationship with copyright, which we're going to quickly segue into. Anyway, this is pretty anecdotal, but the first sci-fi mods I remember seeing from Arma was a Stormtrooper and an AT-AT. That mod is not around anymore. I believe the creators' reason reason is that he didn't want to be sued by Disney, which is not a terrible reason. The mouse is scary. That being said, it wouldn't be the last Star Wars mod, as later into the life of the game, Star Wars Milsim, or StarSim, became a huge part of the Arma 3 community. It wasn't until these massive Star Wars groups started popping up that I saw large-scale gameplay of total conversion mods, and I definitely feel like it was one of the reasons sci-fi groups are so big today in Arma. At the time, the main mod responsible for this was called Opposition. However, it had quite a few problems. These range from using ripped assets to stealing from other mod teams like Uptrade, and even at one point putting the Steam IDs of Bohemia Interactive staff in a blacklist that would crash their game if they launched it with the mod loaded. I'm not making that up, that's real. Goes without saying, this mod has been removed quite a few times and has since been replaced by the hard work of other development teams that have made all their work from scratch, like Legion Studios and 3AS. Both of these are fantastic teams that I only have tremendous gratitude towards for letting me do crazy stuff like fighting in the Clone Wars battles from my childhood, all while not stealing people's assets. I think I probably should have interviewed these guys, but man, I ran out of time. Just know I appreciate you if you're listening. That does now lead me back to the question of, in terms of copyright, how legal are all of these mods? TLDR, they're not. Of course, there's a ton of exceptions that I'm going to go into, but Bohemia's official stance on them is that if a mod is using another entity's copyrighted works without permission, they do not support it, which is a very important thing to say. Bohemia Interactive is an incredibly supportive company when it comes to their modding community, but they also have to abide by, you know, international copyright law. There's been a few instances like Opposition where copyright motions were pushed on them and a mod gets removed. This has also happened with the fabled Mass Effect mod, but for the most part, IP holders don't really care all that much about mods being made with their stuff, and actually in some specific cases, they're more than okay with it. The two examples I love to bring up are Tiberium Genesis and Operation Trebuchet. I am not a big fan of 343 Studios, or Halo Studios, whatever they're calling themselves now. However, I can only give them credit for how supportive they've been to the Halo modding effort for Arma, showing Optray off in their blog posts and even sending free keys to some of the mod developers to play future Halo games. This is also something that Scorch brought up in our interview. I know you've had interactions with Microsoft and or 343 before?
It was back in 2016. I had gone to RTX. So while I was there, I got to talk to one of the 343 guys, the community guys. Don't remember his name I think it was Grim Brother 1. And basically by through talking to him and kind of talking about it more, he was like, yeah, we actually have heard of your mod. We think it's pretty cool. And I talked to him, and there's another 343 guy who just went Ken M. And he was probably the main guy I talked to the most. But basically, I had a short little interview with them and talked about the mod a little bit. And I got featured in, I think, their little community update posts. It was an official acknowledgement, which obviously is always a pretty big deal.
And the other example I mentioned was Tiberium Genesis, which actually got a formal agreement to make the mod from EA with some stipulations, which Sentry talked about from that team.
I had to do the same with EA and Bohemia to get the IP rights to do that, because Bohemia has asked me for that. And I had to contact EA, and I had to struggle with EA and Bohemia together to get the solution. So
that's really interesting. So how was that whole process?
Some rules, it's not allowed to have the name Command & Conquer in it, because EA doesn't want to do anything to do with this. So it means that the publics, the users, are not claiming to EA for bugs and such stuff.
Gotcha.
The music we have added, you have to announce the tracks and who is the owner. Biggest point is for non-commercial use only.
All in all, copyright is something that will probably always plague the modding scene of the Arma games, and for the most part, I believe Bohemia has done a pretty decent job of navigating it. Continuing back with the mods, I know trying to showcase them all would be like trying to dry up the ocean with a paper towel. I probably haven't mentioned this yet, but just on the Steam Workshop, there is 33,000 mods for Arma. If you tried out one Arma mod every day, it would take you over 90 years. So, suffice to say, I'm only going to cover some highlights, and it's lightning round time, so buckle in. First, there is Scion Conflict, which we mentioned earlier. It's a completely original sci-fi property which has expansive lore, factions, and vehicles, all developed by Outworld Studios. Also, from some of those same people is the Dune mod, which in the past has let us perform just awful PvP events. There's also a few Fall of Man mods, which add the weapons and chimera from the Resistance games. Also goes without saying, there's a ton of mods for modern military assets, such as Red Hammer Studios, which has an entire assortment of modern vehicles and weapons with a shocking amount of quality to them. Another one being CUP, which stands for the Community Upgrade Project. They were originally formed under the goal of porting assets from previous Arma games to Arma 3, but now have gone out of their way to create high-quality custom assets. There's also plenty of SCP mods, such as Regulus's Containment Breach, or SAMTF, that brings that universe to life. It's probably not a surprise that there's mods for pretty much every human conflict that involves guns, from World War II to the East Asian War. That last one, by the way, an incredibly high-quality mod. Probably seems niche to a lot of us in the West, but the effort put into that is amazing. They have an entire map, which is 1900 Shanghai, and I believe it's one of the best terrains you can play on Arma. Metal Gear, by the way, did not escape the clutches of Arma modders. There's a fully buildable mother base and playable characters throughout the games, so all you need is someone to talk like Big Boss and you have an operation to run. Battletech, that's another one in case you wanted massive mechs that can level a moon, or there's a mod for the Alien universe for fighting xenomorphs and Wayland Yutani. There's also, of course, Stalker when you want to LARP as Duty with 40 of your friends, and at this point I'm realizing how deep of a hole I'm in right now and that my throat is getting dry. I also want to point out I've only mentioned mods that I've made entire videos out of. There is so much more, like the Aftermath mod, which actually I did make a video of that. I think it was just 3 years ago. It's Fallout, by the way. For my own sanity, I am going to stop there. Just know that for every mod I mention, times that by about 1,000, and you're close to how much there is for this game. It is hard to conceptually wrap your brain around it, and that's not mentioning all the people who have made custom missions and uploaded them, or made custom compositions for Zeus and Eden where you can just place entire like bunker or base setups. I am also not addressing the auxiliary mods that tie everything together. These are the kind of mods that can be used in every mission, whether it's Halo or Warhammer, and it kind of acts as a glue that brings the entire experience together. An amazing example being ACE, or the Advanced Combat Environment. It's definitely easier to say what ACE doesn't do rather than what it does, because what it does do is everything from ballistics to medical systems to game performance. ACE is a fantastic tool to help you run really cool events. There's also mods like Acre and Task Force Radio that allows to connect a TeamSpeak server to Arma to use it as local VoIP. I'm also telling you this in the off chance that you've ever wondered why we had like 100 people in a TeamSpeak server at the start of a video. That is why. There's also mods to replace game sounds to be more immersive, or to change particle effects for stuff like explosions. On top of that, there's also mods that add features to the Eden editor Zeus that enable incredible things in the game. A developer that's made a few of those goes by Fenosi, and I of course had the privilege to talk with them as well.
Those who have played Arma 3 regularly, you might know me from the Plus series of mods, primarily by me adding Zeus modules and or scripts to the game that mission makers and Zeus's alike could use to enhance the experience. Favorite mod that I've ever made? It's gotta be Sci-Fi Support Plus.
Yeah,
or Sci-Fi Plus.
I was thinking of it. I was like, if I was in your shoes, it'd probably be like the mod that can drop like 1,000 bolter shells across an entire map if you set the settings right.
It's just so fun to use.
I wanted to talk with you because a lot of the work you do feels like vital stitch work between these mods, especially the script suites that you create, like Sci-Fi Support Plus and Fire Support Plus. A great example is the one we just ran with like the Mechanicus and stuff. We used the Necron teleporter. The teleporter itself was like the most efficient way to spawn Necrons. Literally only through the Necron teleporter we could like reliably spawn them.
But at the end of the day, the goal's always been to just improve the game overall and allow mission makers and Zeuses to just make better missions. My modding journey kind of started with a bit of a frustrating reason, actually. So originally in the Arma 3 beta, if I remember correctly, there used to be a fire support module to fire 230mm HE rockets. This was removed on the full release of the game. So what I ended up doing was patching said module back in, and that's how I started Fire Support Plus. When I saw how much the community appreciated such quality of life kind of upgrades to the game, it personally gave me like a drive to just keep going and making more stuff.
Fenosi has made a lot of miscellaneous mods, by the way. He also has 5 pages of contributions to the Arma workshop. One that I want to point out specifically is this rocket script that, if you'll remember, Scorched used as my scripting example. Fenosi saw that and decided it should be a mod, so now it is. Hopefully now at this point you're starting to get the idea that modding in Arma is an ecosystem where a bunch of teams and mods work together to create amazing experiences. Even on the community side of things, a lot of the developers work together and share their expertise to enrich the entire modding ecosystem as a whole. For example, the amazing Star Wars maps like Endor or Scarif were made by the terrain creator Nightovizard, who also worked on most of the maps for Uptray, and one of the lead developers for Uptray, Scorch, helped configure the Steam Tank in Empires of Old, and the guys that made that mod also helped texture the Imperial Knights by Webknight, who also made a melee system for There Is Only War Space Marines, and you can kind of get where I'm going with that. A ton of this community's modding endeavors are connected, and it's what makes Arma modding so fantastic and special to me. It's quickly becoming my actual dream that I'm just doing a justice in describing it. Also, before I continue, and this is a second pass edit edition, I got some honorable mention mods that were created to run single mission files. Two great examples are Super Miller Land, a mission that uses Miller, one of the main characters in the Arma 3 campaign, to play a Mario-like platformer, as well as Armageddon, a survival mission with meteors and tornadoes that I have put way too many hours into. The next modding subject I wanted to touch on is the forbidden art of kit bashing. This is essentially when you take a bunch of other mods and combine them in an unholy conglomerate to create something new. A great example that we mentioned earlier was me trying to use the pirate mod Nassau to create a Warhammer fantasy event, which for what it was went pretty decently. By the way, there is a pirate mod with working ship and cannons. I completely forgot to mention it. Anyway, of course, the sky is the limit with kit bashing. One of the biggest examples I can think of is when I combined a bunch of mods to create an alternate future where Rome never fell, and we just had these sci-fi legionaries running around conquesting. It was fantastic. Then quickly moving on to another subject, Arma can also be used to not play a video game. What I mean by that is that it is surprisingly an effective art and animation tool. I personally have a ton of experience with this. The first thing that got me popular on YouTube was a web series I made called Harp in Arma 3 that had a bunch of animated and cinematic moments throughout it. However, I also have Mosconi to talk with about it. I really hope I pronounced his username right. I never asked him our entire interview. And for those unfamiliar, before we jump into that interview, he's the person that's made Scorch or the Battle of Yonkers using Arma 3 as an animation tool. Here is the interview. Kind of want to just pick your brain on the whole process of like using Arma as a filmmaking tool. I know a lot of your videos are composition, so it's not entirely Arma. There's obviously like the backbone is Arma models and animation sets.
I have like 3,000 hours in Arma. I've only played like 2 hours worth of multiplayer.
That's crazy.
It was basically just me messing around with AI and Zeus. And I spent like 2,000 hours doing that. I'm like, wow, this is like, because when I was a little kid, I used to play with like the green army guys. I'm like, wow, this is like the video game version of that. So I'm just making my own battles and stuff like that. And then I find Gcam.
Oh yeah.
And that's where it all went down. What if we download Reshade? What if we add depth of field? What if I, like for Scorch, shout out to Black Cell Audio, what if we do a full custom score in sound design?
Really?
Like, yeah. Now it's like a full like movie production now. Like everything is built from the ground up. It gets pretty complicated with the coding.
I can bet.
But like with the tools that like we have now, like I'm surprised that Machinima isn't making a comeback, because it's so easy to make like good stories with like simple tools, you know?
I know Arma has an animation kind of program in it where you can set up sequenced animation. Is that something you're utilizing a lot?
I just use what's in game. I know Webknight is super big on that, so maybe he'll teach me one day.
I did his interview. Actually, his was 2 days of interviews, because that man is like an encyclopedia. A creature, really.
When I started producing Scorch, I did not know a single thing about Warhammer. I just thought the Casterkin looked really badass.
I mean, so like, that's fair.
Rogue, he makes Rogue and Soup.
Yep.
They are one of the lead developers for ICP. They make fantastic stuff. So I was like, I got to make a story with this. There is so much assets.
So you were talking about you're using mostly like pre-canned animations. I assume you're also using workshop animation sets that you find, or is it like mostly vanilla?
Shout out to Webknight again.
I did notice the melee ones. Yes, I stole that exact same thing way before I did like weekly haha funny kind of content. I had a series called Harp going on.
No. It's funny that you say that. My World War Z series was inspired by your Harp cinematic.
That's crazy.
Nice. Like the animations, it's all in the debug console, so everything's timed. My debug console just looks like a mess now because there is so much like code. Like I have a couple photos of just the scene builds. I think one of the scene builds.
I would love to see them.
The main battle scene for Scorch had over like 15,000 objects in it. Secret though to like getting good frames is I use Gcam most of it. There is a setting where you can lower like the time. So I record at 1% speed for every single scene, and then I put it into Premiere Pro and I speed it up 995%, and that's how I get the 60 FPS with like 500 AI running around.
I use the exact same. I use set act time 0.01, and then I literally do the exact same thing. It's like a dark secret. And with that, I think I'm done with my very brief mod showcase. This modding community is truly amazing, and I believe the developers have done a decent job at nurturing it. In fact, Bohemia does their own modding competition called Make Arma Not War that they've run for quite a few years, and not only awards prizes to mod developers, but mission makers and game mode devs as well. Bohemia also has a decent track record of hiring members of its community that have shown great talent, something that I definitely remember Webnight mentioning.
Talked with the guy who made Resist campaign for Arma 3, and then he got hired by Bohemia. Because the work that he did was, he basically did an official expansion to Arma 3 campaign, and like with the quality of an Arma 3 campaign and beyond, it's like he had some of the things in his like mini campaign, as he called it, that Arma 3 didn't have it for a moment. He had like underground levels that you can go and stuff like that, and that blew my mind.
On top of all of that, almost all recent DLC for Arma 3 has been made by mod teams, who, with financial agreement from Bohemia, make spanning mod projects that otherwise wouldn't exist. The best example of this is SOG Prairie Fire, which is the best Vietnam War experience I've had in any video game. The passion they had for this project, interviewing veterans, getting their history right, and the talent that they put into their assets and game design is incredible. And on top of that, they've used the project to advocate for real-life issues such as veteran recognition. One of the most touching examples of this is when the devs of Prairie Fire helped campaign for Colonel Paris Davis to be awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions during the Battle of Bong Sun, where Paris was wounded 4 times in his successful attempts to save 4 other critically wounded U.S. soldiers despite being given the order to leave them. Also, despite his officers recommending him for the medal twice, he never received it. The devs then used their unreleased mod with the encouragement from Bohemia to recreate scenes from the battle, which would eventually help in the result of Colonel Paris Davis finally being awarded his overdue medal. It's also truly worth being a quote-unquote paid mod because it was actually a full game experience that they delivered to the customer. I could talk for another hour about how much I like SOG Prairie Fire, and a great example of how much I like it is the next video after this one is going to be an Arma operation in SOG Prairie Fire. So, subscribe if you want to see when that comes out. There's so many. There's so many, Walrus. The other creator DLC that I love to mention is Spearhead 1944, which I have had one of my best Arma experiences ever with, which was playing their campaign for 7 hours straight with my friends, and it's World War II, so it's cool. I'm also biased because they're the only people that have ever invited me to like an official Arma event, so thank you guys. And my last example I can give for Bohemia's support of their modding community is that if you search Bush Lurker in the editor, you will find a statue. Bush Lurker in the early days of Arma modding was a god among men, creating unique and amazing terrains, as well as being notorious for spending his time helping other developers and always being there to lend a hand when someone needed help with a project. Tragically, in 2017, he passed away. It affected a lot of the community, and one developer that he helped made a statue asset to remember him by. Bohemia Interactive took that a step further by officially adding the statue and placing it on their new map, Malden 2035, which, by the way, Bush Lurker helped create the textures for. So, on that somber yet good note, I believe that ends this section. Alright, I'm finished, and now on with the pretty big elephant in the room. Arma 3 is not the latest Arma game to be released because Arma Reforger exists.
Before we get into Reforger, I definitely have a lot that I want to talk about. I'm going to try to, once again, go through as quick as I can, but I mean, there's a lot here. Like, there's a lot. Not that it's bad. I like this. I think he was absolutely the perfect person for this. I really like how thorough he's being. Coders are wizards. I don't know how they do half the stuff they do. To take a engine focused on milsim, quote unquote, right, and to just turn it into pirate steam engines, doing a bunch of the stuff that they do. It's wild. Like Necron teleporters clearly being, as he said, one of the most efficient ways of getting Necrons onto the field. Wild to me. I think that's fantastic. And I think that feeds into a little bit the next section of the sentiment that big money ruined gaming. And I think that, like, as I said throughout, like, AAA gaming definitely has its faults, don't get me wrong. And that AAA gaming in general really went downhill when big money started to get involved. This goes into the whole copyright aspect. We'll cover that in a little bit because there's a couple other things here. But I think that the fact that Bohemia Interactive still remains humble, treading back territory, is kind of great. The blacklist and ripping assets, don't be an asshole, right? At the end of the day, it just takes one person to ruin it for the collective, right? I mean, I keep citing back during Sun and Moon Pokemon, right? Sun and Moon were coming out, not Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, Sun and Moon. There were people who were playing illegally gotten copies on their actual Nintendo accounts, on their actual 3DSs, on official Nintendo servers. At the end of 2024, we had somebody who was, I guess, distributing unreleased Nintendo games, allegedly. And it just takes one person to really ruin it for everyone else. Putting devs on a blacklist, ripping assets from other mods without proper accreditation. I mean, if there's a mistake, like, oh, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't know this mod came free, let me fix that, right? It happens. People are human, they make mistakes. I do think that is one of those things that just don't be an asshole, right? And that's how you make an enemy of the community, because it's all kind of gentleman's agreement, shake, because once we don't have that, it becomes an issue. There was I don't know what I wrote on that one. I think it was Warhammer, because for some reason my note just says there was only war. I'm assuming that's Warhammer. Warhammer, Steam legal and distribution. So we're not going to touch too much on the legal because we already touched on it throughout the rest of the video. I did like that he did address the copyright section. I think for someone like me, that was a really cool section to see, and I'm very glad that he included it, because it's been very easy to just kind of gloss over it. Are mods legal? Is this above board? Technically not. Which was really fun to hear, because I mean, at the end of the day, these are other people's IPs, these are other people's properties. They do maintain authorship over that, but it's really cool to see that people like EA will give with stipulation access to things like that, right? Like, hi, you can do this, but your soundtracks must be cited and announced. This must happen, right? Giving with stipulations. I think that that's really cool. I actually really liked that. And I think that potentially, I don't know how much this goes into it. I know that there is a difference between if you, like, say, sell a mod versus if a mod is free, and versus if a mod is commissioned or, Patreon, quote unquote, locked. So the reason why the Pokemon mod for Pal World got so much backlash was because what I understand the dude was charging for ripped models from, I think it was Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. So charging for ripped models of an IP he does not own, right? If that is what I remember of the case, that definitely runs afoul of a lot of things. I would definitely say that runs into the being the asshole category to a degree. Free versus paid. I mean, if it's free, I mean, it's right for non-commercial use. Commercial use and non-commercial use are completely separate things, right? It's why I still pay for Epidemic Sound despite their system completely just, I don't know what's going on with their back end, with no communication, mind you. So, like, I get it. I get having to have licenses for things commercially. That totally makes sense. That's just the nature of the business nowadays. But it's very interesting that a lot of these are made for free, and a lot of these are just passion projects, right? But for those who want something specific, right? We mentioned commission earlier, right? Hi, I will commission you to do this thing. I will spend money for your time so you can do this. I mean, you're not necessarily, I mean, sure, in a roundabout way, you are paying for the end product, right? But I think that might be, I'd have to check on the actual legal definition on that and actual, like, how that works versus how that doesn't work. I know that allegedly you have some, like, Bethesda mods that are locked behind Patreon, like they're Patreon walled to get access to the Discord servers or the files, although you're technically not buying, you're not paying for the files. So that does get around things in its own right. I think that mostly rounds out all of the legal isms. I very much like that he went over it. I very much like that he discussed it. I like that, this is, you're using other people's property. Don't be a dick about it, right? Don't rip assets. Don't be that guy, because all it takes is one person to ruin it. And also their official stance from Bohemia Interactive of, we love our modders. However, we don't support using materials that aren't our own, right? Very, very, very professional way to deal with that, which does make me curious, because I actually didn't know about Helldivers until RubixRaptor's video on Helldivers. I didn't know Helldivers 1 even existed until his Helldivers 2 video, and then Helldivers 2, the game, came out, and I'm like, wow, that was you will this into existence? Like 100%. Like I can attest to that. Makes me wonder what Resident Evil mods they have out there. I'm pretty sure he's done a Resident Evil lot, but things like I wonder if we have Ganados. I wonder if we have Pepio is the name of one of them in 5. That's not the one I'm thinking about. Magini. I wonder if we have actual like Resident Evil assets. I don't know. And it's dependent on each company too, which I think is interesting. I like that it's. I think that the reason why I wanted to kind of segue this way was because it is free feedback for the company, right? I feel in a lot of cases the devs' hands are tied because for all intents and purposes tying back to big money, right? Like, hi, we are going to say you guys at 343 Halo, Microsoft, whatever, right? You are going to make the new Halo game. This is what it's going to have. It's going to have a massive open world. You're going to remove armor from armor lockers. Those are going to be multiplayer and or paid. This is going to be what's going to happen. We're going to ship this. Even though we did promise co-op campaign, we will be shipping this without co-op campaign. We will be backtracking that. Like, do you think the devs are really doing that? Do you think that developers come into work and they're just like, yeah, let's F over these players? No, I as much as I want to say that it's on upper management and executives, I do think that in no small part is the shareholders as well, which ties neatly with the philosophy that big money ruined gaming. And so I think that this is a very interesting thing to look into here. I think that the devs' hands are tied, NDAs as well. It's very interesting because it can be free feedback, right? So if you're looking at making Halo Infinite 2, for example, right? Maybe look at what's going on with some Arma mods, right? Get some inspiration from it, because at the end of the day, you do own the IPs. I think this is interesting because we can see game design at its finest, in my opinion, strictly because we're not worried about shareholders. We're not worried about big budgets. We're not worried about, well, but I'm giving you this amount of money, therefore I want this in the project. And even if it runs counterintuitive to what the project actually is. Going into the coders or wizards kind of thing, I'm having to bounce around on my points a little bit, and I do apologize because I have like an actual paragraph of just like 1 sentence points. Coders of Magic, the 1% speed trick, I've never heard of that. I don't know if that's an actual film thing. I don't know if that's a specific like game thing. I've never heard of that trick, and that's really fascinating. I might have to either get a really cool explanation on that, or I might have to dig into why that works. I don't know if that translates to actual IRL film. I don't know if that's specific things. I don't know if this is an end-all be-all kind of thing, right? Like if I filmed this, what I'm doing right now, this reaction at 1%, and then sped it up by 995%, I don't know if it's necessarily going to look the way I want it to. So I'm curious, like time and place kind of thing, right? And how that conclusion was came to, because I mean, that's fascinating. I've never heard of it. I like that that was brought up. And I don't know if it's necessarily the dirty secret so much as no one asked, so therefore I didn't tell, right? That kind of thing. It's very curious. I'm curious on that. Animation and art aspect of that, too. I like that we do have those Forge elements, right? Very much reminiscent for me specifically of Halo 3. Logging into Halo 3 back when I was in high school and just on my friend's Xbox 360 and just looking at it, I'm just like, yeah, no, as it turns out, Forge and Theater are the future of gaming because it's going to allow content creators to do things. It's free publicity. It's free real estate. It's free marketing, right? While you still do own the copyright, all that fun stuff, right? Obviously, once again, copyright in companies is subjective. Once again, where we have Sony squatting on something like Bloodborne, copyright claiming, be really aggressive with Bloodborne videos despite not really doing anything with the IP, and I think that's subjective to each company. But the fact that you could just have these tools, right? I've never heard of these tools. This makes me inspired to like, okay, cool. What happens if I go in and pick up these tools? What can I make from this, right? Still curious about the Games Workshop's stance on this because they've generally been pretty unfriendly to community content. So I wonder if Games Workshop specifically is one of those that's a little shady in comparison. But it is free feedback. I mean, even in the end, even outside of the gameplay standpoint, right? Like, okay, well, how did this work? Can Games Workshop make a actual like Arma 3 Warhammer 40K game sort of thing, right? I think that's interesting to consider, but also from an animation art perspective, right? Like imagine the Chaplain scene from Space Marine 2, right? But maybe you get some really good shots of, some pan over from left to right, some Cadian soldiers, right? You could just take that and use it elsewhere. And what else can it inspire, right? Where we have the individual who said he was inspired by RubixRaptor's own video to do certain animations, right? So the fact that the animation and art segment of that is really, really fascinating to me. And it does go to movie production status, right? Like you have your different tools. You have your storyboarding, you have your storytelling, you have your tricks like that 1% trick speeding up by 995 in post. You do have a lot, you have to worry about different filmography things. I'm sure for certain shots, rule of thirds might apply, right? Lighting, you got to deal with saturation. I think that it's really cool, and it can be really rewarding, right? The people who make some really good content, right, can potentially get hired by Bohemia Interactive. It's not a guarantee, as with anything, right? But I think it's actually cool that that option has existed and potentially still does exist, depending on what's going on, depending on what the current needs are. I think that it's really, really cool. I think that it's something that I think a lot more studios might be on board with. I just think that the AAA industry is just too saturated with investors and shareholders trying to make their voices heard, with or without their direct oversight, because obviously you can go with an investment firm and they invest your money for you. How much control does the actual person funding it have versus it just an investment firm? I don't know, dude. That's I would literally have to speak to an investment banker on that, and I don't know an investment banker offhand, and I'm pretty sure the information that they could share is probably under some sort of NDA or regulation, so probably will never get that information, but it's interesting to think about. Also the financial agreement with modders as well, right? At the end of the day, if you're spending 20,000 hours in Arma, right, and you have a certain skill set, right, it feels good to be rewarded for your skill set, right? Hey, we'll come to an agreement with you to do this really cool thing, to make this really cool campaign, right? And is it necessary? And you could even work as a at will contract employment, right? Or lump sum. I'm sure there's ways that you could do it for tax purposes and stuff like that, but without hiring them on as actual employees. And some people don't want to be hired on as actual employees. Like, hey, it'd be cool if I could work on this with the passion and skill set that I have, right? I think it's really cool. I think that coming to a financial agreement definitely sets them apart from other studios as well. It's very, very cool. Leaning more into the creative aspect of it, we get into the ability to create your own mods and series and stuff, right? Which is honestly really, really cool. Being able to for example, once again, my introduction to Helldivers was actually through RubixRaptor's Arma video. Being able to create your own series and stories, like there's a couple he mentioned, I can't remember the name offhand, but like their own actual like proprietary new series and stuff from being made in Arma. I think it's a cool landing platform. I think it's cool to be able to springboard from that into something else, or at least to test your luck and see if it's something that you want to do, make changes and stuff. I think it's honestly really cool. Going into compatibility mods and kit bashing, I mean, you're modding for all intents and purposes, right? Certain mods are going to conflict with each other. Certain mods are going to do some things. Mods might be required using the same exact file. I mean, just compatibility. It's the nature of modding, especially if there's a big update to either the game, if there's an update to say whatever operating system you're using, whether it's going to be Windows or Linux, right? I don't know if there's Mac OS support on this, for example, but like, yeah, I mean, that's just the nature. If that's the nature of modding. Kit bashing, though, I think in itself is a really cool concept because, yeah, let's run these two mods together and see what happens, right? You can get unintended results. Sometimes that, yeah, is a bad thing, especially if you're trying to make sure that, your Skyrim ENB shaders, all your dismemberment mechanics and stuff are all working together in tandem with each other, and you're frustrated because suddenly you're losing frames or textures aren't rendering correctly, right? But at the same time, if you're just going into this like F it, we ball, sometimes it can actually produce some very hilarious results, which I'm a huge fan of. I do like the ability to use this as a sandbox, as a medium to create your own series and be able to tell your own story, which leads into obviously the filmmaking aspect of this, the operations aspect of this. Zeus can be used as another dimension as well. It is at the end of the day, even if other IPs are being used, so for example, a Halo mod or even a Games Workshop mod, right? Games Workshop Arma 3 40K, they can use it as QA for other studios as well. Not only can Arma use this as free QA for itself, right? Like, oh, wait a minute, public sentiment on for certain mods like this are saying that Zeus could use this feature or Zeus could be improved in this capacity. Well, I'm glad we didn't spend that much money trying to, hire somebody to just effectively do this when we could just rely on our community, right? Think like, I guess, like Payday Status maybe, or other games in which, modders have allowed games to have features added to them for quality of life improvements, right? I mean, we see this across the industry. Some games and some companies are more open to the idea than others, and I think that this once again speaks to Bohemia Interactive's their integrity, and it speaks to what they want to do. They are truly a gaming company rather than a line go up business. I mean, all businesses want line to go up. Don't get me wrong. That's not that in itself is not inherently evil. It's sacrifice. It's clearly shittifying a product for line go up, and that's where I run into issues with it. But like improvements like for Zeus and stuff like that, right? Improvements for terrain features, quality of life things that people might ask for, like a mod. Like what was it? Earlier in the video we're talking about how NPCs don't save their loadouts. You have to have mods for that. Hey, maybe they introduce that as a mod, right? I think it's kind of cool. I think that it's really neat. It's literally just free Q&A and feedback. You just have to have a way to sift through the data and then see if it's something that's going to be something you want to fix, right? Like if you have a bug where like if you go to this one corner of the map, like this rock is clipping inappropriately into another asset and the skybox is a little strange there, right? Versus this is actually a literal progress gate bug where if you go through this quest chain in the wrong way, where your average player would intuit it as the correct way to go through it, and it locks you out, which one's going to be more of a priority to fix, right? I mean, that goes down the list of just like prioritization and stuff. So that in itself is a thing. I like that they use military sim versus lack of military sim, but just saying it's a simulator. I do think that is I think that is correct. I think that that's really cool. I think that it's being able to think outside the box, right? Like, oh, well, this is a military sim, but what happens if we throw a Warhammer 40k Knight in there? What happens if we throw an Eldari Wraith Knight in there, right? What happens if we try to make affixed bayonets declare Katie in charge versus the greatest Wa, right? I think that it leads to some interesting things. I think that the reclassification and thinking outside the box is what this community does very well, and it's very, very special. In terms of the small details, in terms of actually being fairly effective and also adding a lot, being very additive and creative, such as talking about the melee folks mod, the HUD off. It's small details that can make it, right? Just turning the HUD off can change the experience, right? If you're going for more of an action thing, have more of like a Halo HUD, you know, with your ammo counter and stuff like that. You know, your alien count where you can actually see the xenomorph. You have kind of like an Aliens, right? Alien 2 kind of vibe. Or if you're going for more of a horror vibe, right? Turn off the HUD, maybe the lighting, deal with the lighting a little bit more, have a bunch of enclosed spaces. I mean, play too that you can use different things to accentuate the strengths and play to whatever you're trying to do, which is honestly really cool. I like the comment about cracking the engine to be able to do things like melee combat and stuff like that, right? It is free Q&A research for Bohemian Interactive, as well as anyone who they're currently using it for. So let's say they want to make a new Command & Conquer game. What if there was a giant Mass Effect overhaul, right? And they were making a new Mass Effect game, and they could pull from this. They could go, okay, so why are people engaging with this? How does that match up current business philosophy? It's literally just free Q&A and feedback, and I actually really like it, especially when you do crack the engine in certain ways, and it shows how they could potentially improve the engine, should they decide to. Very, very cool. Yeah, I think that's mostly everything, because now we're getting back to, design discrepancy. If there's something that doesn't exist, just make it, right? Like, just make it 5-head, right? At the end of the day, right, if you see a lack of something, you do have the ability to try and make it, right? For all intents and purposes. And that's what we like about it. If it doesn't exist, make your own, right? If you don't like how the Chimeras are, if you don't like how maybe the Bloodhounds are, if you don't like how certain assets are, you do have every tool at your disposal to try and maybe make something that maybe is more accurate to the box, maybe something a little more lore accurate, right? It does have that ease of access. Obviously, there's definitely going to be a learning curve. Absolutely, that's I cannot overstate that enough. However, you do have the ability to do it, and that's the thing. The modularity, the approachability, both are there. It definitely rewards great design. The tools are there. The community has made those tools. I'm really, really, really happy about that. Let me just get back into copyright. We've talked about legal so much in this that I'm not going to become a broken record on that. I have one that just says management. I think that mostly was into those final points about being, good management, being able to hire people who do well, being able to recognize good work, being able to have that professional distinction in regards to copyright and saying, yeah, mods are okay, mods using other people's work are not. Yeah, I mean, it seems like everything's pretty legit. I'm sure maybe there's some issues, but what company doesn't have its issues, right? Company that you work for, have worked for in the past, everyone's going to have their issues, right? I don't think there's a perfect company out there for all intents and purposes, even if they follow every single moral and ethical fast track, right? If they're doing everything morally and ethical, or everything morally correct and ethically correct, I mean, I'm sure there might still be issues in regards to miscommunications at the company, right? Or maybe certain things aren't said in the correct way. Yeah, totally makes sense, but that's just an everywhere kind of thing. We have to judge everyone by that same ruler. So, honestly, very pleased, though. I like how approachable this is. This video has made this Arma in general incredibly approachable to a dingus like me, and I'm very much happy with this, which leads into Arma Reforged, and I'm very happy to see where this is at. I want to see how this interacts with 3.
You took the high road and left me on the low road, but the low road is good enough for me.
Okay, technically the next Arma game that came after Arma 3 was Arma Argo, but no one talks about that one. Arma Reforger, in essence, was originally marketed as a tech demo because after 20 years, Bohemia Interactive has finally made a completely new engine called Infusion. Since now the plan was to create Arma 4 on this new engine, they wanted to put out a test of concept and a platform that the modding community could mess around with before the next sequel. That was Arma Reforger, and since then it feels like the scope to Reforger has changed and BI is developing it much like a regular game while also working on Arma 4. So the question is, what do I think about it, and why is this video about Arma 3 and not Arma Reforger? Well, in short, I believe the Infusion engine is superior to Arma 3's in almost every way. The game looks better, in a lot of ways it runs better, and I'm told programming and modding in it gives developers far more options. However, feature-wise, it's pretty bare bones, and I do want to preference, this is not a new concept for Arma games. A lot of people that were around can probably remember waiting like an entire 2 years before going to Arma 3 from Arma 2, so I wouldn't be super worried about that concept alone. And while they've definitely fleshed out Reforger a bit since release, it still doesn't have stuff like Eden or a 2D mission editor, which is really holding it back. On top of that, like I just mentioned, it takes time for mod developers to move over to a new game, or some mod developers are already done and the new project doesn't even come over to Reforger, so that ends up making a vacuum for new teams to come around and create them. I also know a lot of mod teams didn't move over because it was advertised as a stopgap and they didn't see it as worth their time to put a lot of effort into. I'm also speaking a lot for them right now. I obviously asked this question to a lot of the teams I interviewed, so I'm going to let them speak on it. However, I want to give the warning that I want you to view this through the lens of Arma 3 developers talking about it and not Arma Reforger devs talking about it. I believe Arma 3 devs are going to be way more critical about Reforger because, well, they're modding Arma 3, and if you asked Reforger devs, I believe the outlook would be a lot more positive. I still think the Arma 3 mod devs were overall pretty positive about Reforger and are excited for its future, but they're a lot more critical of it as well, so keep that in mind.
Arma Reforger as a next step for me, it feels like one step further, 2 step backward, or 1 step forward and 2 step backward, right? Because an easy example, I see a cool mod coming out in Arma 3 Workshop. I'm like messaging my guys and like, yo, look at this cool thing. You want to test it out and like play with it? And people are like, yeah, sure, let's go. I installed the mod from the workshop. I launch it through launcher. I go into LAN, right? I host a game, and since I have port forwarding, people can just connect. And like 5 minutes and we're already in game and testing it out. But in Reforger, it is so hard just to like spend the time with the boys that I just don't feel right in that game. It looks amazing, like what they're doing with an engine, right? I'm really looking forward to what they're gonna do with an engine and like what kind of possibilities will be there. Right? A lot of people who are playing, like old players from Arma 2 were like, what's the point to play that thing if we have all the mods in Arma 2? Especially DayZ was a big thing, right? Back in 2012. I think it like the mod came out, right? And everybody was playing that. So when Arma 3 came out, nobody was paying attention to that thing. Oh, new Arma series. Does it have DayZ mod? No, fuck it. Same with Arma Reforger, right? I was just having a feeling with Arma Reforger that a lot of players are just not moving there because there is not too much content. You know, you will play like basic game modes in the basic setting for like a week, but that's it, right? But they are listening to the most part of the community. People were telling that they want more complicated medical system, and they delivered that, and they delivered like something in between vanilla and ace, which is like you have like bandages, you know.
I was really happy with that.
It actually, I really like that. I was thinking about replicating it in Arma 3, but there is mods like that.
I think Arma Reforger shows a lot of promise, but right now it has a lack of accessibility. Right? It lacks the access to a Eden editor. But when we look at mission making, which is the core of I'm able to play Arma, is you need a mission maker who knows his shit, makes a good mission so we can all play it together. To do it in Arma Reforger right now, we're talking about learning the equivalent of Unreal Engine 5. I don't want to learn an engine like as a hobby.
Biggest thing is Reforger is still in its children's shoes.
Yes.
It's still in the beginning, still needs a lot of stuff to be done, like tanks, working tracks and such stuff. Right now, Red Hammer Studios or whatever did some tanks. and did their own things, but it's not originally. So
Yeah.
I have to say I should not start to mod in Reforger because I really like the new engine. I really like the emissive part because I really want to see Tiberium fields glowing and reflecting the light. If I learn to mod in Reforger, I'm sure I won't mod anymore in Arma 3. The community is still players.
Yes.
You know?
So I like that they put a strong focus into the modding because they know that's exactly what's keeping Arma 3 alive. Right. Yeah, it's a completely different system compared to how you would jump into Eden and make a... Eden doesn't exist.
I despise
It's like a different program.
That's my number one, to have to mission make out of game, treat it like you're modding to make a mission, I think is the number one thing holding back Reforger. So, in summary, we like Arma Reforger, and we're hopeful that it will continue to grow and mature on our way towards Arma 4. Which, by the way, during their last anniversary celebration, this wonderful thing came on screen. Arma 4 is set to release in 2027, which is definitely a very long time, but Rogue made a good point about a silver lining. What do you think about the Arma 4 release date of 2027?
But I'm actually happy about that. If Arma 3 is going to be coming out next year, there's only a certain amount of time left for my mods on Arma 3. With Arma 4 coming out in 2027 now, it's like my mods at least have another 2 years.
Right.
To be worked on and enjoyed.
So, to close out the Arma Reforger conversation, I am very hopeful for the game, and in fact, we have short-term plans to actually do events in it. There is already fantastic mods showing up for that game, such as a Fallout one I saw, as well as a homebrew sci-fi one with ships and all. So, time will tell how this segment ages. Oh my god, my throat is going. You can tell I've been talking for a little too long. Hopefully, our hope in Bohemia Interactive and Reforger pays off, and oh my god, I sound like a 60-year-old smoker. I am going to take a break here and then continue to record the narration after I don't sound like a frog. Hey everyone, I am back. My esophagus doesn't feel like sandpaper anymore, so essentially what I'm saying is that hopefully our hope pays off and Arma Reforger turns into something beautiful on our way towards Arma 4 in the next 3 years or so. Now the last thing I wanted to cover before I wrap this up is getting into Arma itself. It's crazy all the new people that continue to flow into this 11-year-old game, and if I remember right, the sales figure for the last Arma sale was 500,000 copies. So, I'm sure at least one of you has gotten it recently and are curious about how to even play this game. In Arma 3's current phase, it is very hard to just get in the game and join a public server to have fun, especially if you're looking for a modded experience. That being said, King of the Hill, fantastic game mode to play if you just want to try out Arma and shoot people. No mods required, all scripted. Anyway, most of the time you have to find a unit or group hosting events, which can definitely be a little hard to do. Off the top of my head, r/find a unit on Reddit is an okay place to start, but in my personal experience, all the groups I've been a part of, I've joined through word of mouth from friends. So if you don't really have anyone in the Arma sphere already, you're definitely fighting uphill, but I believe in you. In terms of actually modding Arma 3, we are in the golden age of being able to do so. In the early days, you had to do it the old-fashioned way, downloading files from Armaholic. God rest that website's soul. It gave me ransomware once, so fond memories. Anyway, once you did, you would physically place it in the game files. Or if you were lucky enough to be part of a group, you could use Arma 3 Sync to download it from a repository. Nowadays, we have the Steam Workshop where you just hit subscribe to the mod you want and then click a button to enable them in the launcher, which by the way was a feature Arma didn't always have. That launcher is fantastic. However, if you were to play Arma Reforger, it's way easier to get into modded games. It's still in the stage where most people play on public servers as well, and you can just join and the mod loader is built into the actual game itself, which has positives and negatives, but for this case, it's super helpful. Either way, there's a lot of fun to be had with Arma, no matter how you enjoy it. Hopefully through this video, I was able to express my passion for these games in an informative way, and I think it's time for closing statements.
There's a land beyond the river that...
Before we get to the closing statements, we do have a couple things I wanted to cover. I'm sorry, this game supports LAN. Do you know how long it's been since somebody... I remember my Xbox 360 days, right? Being like, man, one day I'll go off to college and I'll still be playing Modern Warfare 2 and just LAN cabling it up, and that never happened. And now we live in the weirdest timeline. However, any game that supports LAN, especially modern day, I mean, I think that alone is worth the sale, especially if, once again, if you can actually own the copy I miss LAN parties. Yeah, no, I like the picture of the LAN party that circulates around with the dude duct taped to the ceiling. You know which one I'm talking about. It always circulates. It's great. If it actually does support LAN, that's actually kind of wild. That alone is a merit to the game. I always like games that I can play offline. As somebody who's had to move around a couple times, I remember when I had to move back to my parents at one point, and I was trying to do Destiny 2, the season the Glycon came out. You can only do so much of Glycon, so many runs a month before your mobile hotspot runs out. I also ran Halo 5 actual like vanilla on disc because I didn't have internet at the time. Without the patches, as it turns out, the AI, your allied AI, actually got better with updates. Vanilla legendary Halo 5 was rough. Let's put it that way. Oof, they went down so much. I like. Also, we can actually see what I was talking about in regards to using it for free Q&A and improvements. Not only do we see that with Zeus and other quality of life things that they added the quality of life with mods, where you could just subscribe on the Steam Workshop. You can go in, you can enable, disable mods. You're not having to go into some Napster or LimeWire style Arma site and get ransomware and malware. Dude, that's so funny. I love it. Like actual like LimeWire status. That's honestly really funny. I don't know about Napster. I think Napster was. I can't remember. It's been too long since I had to deal with that. It is definitely a progress gate though, especially if you look at wanting to play, right? Especially if you have to go through community interaction, Reddit boards. So it's unfortunate you can't just boot up the game. But then again, it's not necessarily a Call of Duty game, right? But I'm sure that there's plenty of groups like Ignis Core as well who would be able to accommodate players. And I think that it is more a community-focused game. It's less showing up to play Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! And more showing up to play Warhammer, right? You show up to play Warhammer, and the people are playing Warhammer. You go on the specific days that people are playing Warhammer to get some really good games in and to talk Warhammer with people. It's not like, well, I'll just show up to this store on this random day and someone will probably play Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh, right? I think that there's a little bit of divide there as somebody who plays effectively all of these. I do like that they are acknowledging mods because remember, a lot of things don't acknowledge mods or they only acknowledge like the big thing with Final Fantasy 14 right now is the blacklist and how there's that mod that's able to scrape a lot more information because of the blacklist change off into client side, compiling that information. And Yoshi P did make a statement about it. However, there are people still like Cider Spider do who still have at this time some duress who definitely didn't like that statement and think that it not necessarily enough is done, but like gaming and mods have an interesting relationship with them is what I'm trying to say. So the fact that they're acknowledging mods and acknowledging that even in a, like he's saying, a stopgap, this is a holdover going into Arma 4. I think acknowledging mods is acknowledging the strengths of the community and acknowledging their player base rather than just saying, Lamau, here, have this new Arma experience. Give me money for Battle Pass, by the way, right? I like it. I like that they're actually being cognizant of this. Very, very good. I have a lot of respect for this business model. In a bare bones state like it is, new games are, Skyrim was in the state that it was, right, until not necessarily fairly recently, right, but like modding in Skyrim, a lot of changes have been made, especially going into special edition. A lot of going into Starfield, right, there wasn't a whole lot of mods, especially with the creation kit not being live for the first 6 months or however long it was. I think it was like up to a year. I'd have to actually look at the dates on when the creation kit actually went live. But then again, not many people really care about Starfield, so there's not even really mods for Starfield. Like, sure, there's some, but a lot of people will just go back to modding Skyrim and Fallout 4, right? Because a lot of people do enjoy those games. And as we've said throughout, you make a good product, people will just play it, right? I definitely think treating it like a blank slate in that holdover time is kind of the mentality here. I also did like the mention of, yes, well, this is Arma Reforger coming from Arma 3 modders, right? So there's definitely a bias. I do like the announcement and clarification that there is a bias there. Not that a bias is good or bad, right? Well, I like Space Marines. Well, I like Tau. Well, I like Eldari, right? Grats, these are biases, right? Sure, you're allowed to have biases, just don't be an ass about it. So it's interesting to think about as a blank slate, especially from a life cycle and content standpoint, because it will get more content as time goes on, especially in this holdover period between now and Arma 4. I think it's going to be interesting, and I'm very curious to see how this holds up to Arma 4 releasing. I think this is going to be in a couple years. I think people would be really cool to come back to this, and that honestly leads in this blank slate stage, in this life cycle, where we're at the life cycle of this game, where you have to find the groups like Ignis Core, like on Reddit and stuff, or through word of mouth to be able to find some really good games. It's really interesting because we are in this learning phase where UE5 was mentioned. I don't know if it's based off of Unreal 5 or not. I'm assuming it is from what was mentioned. I'm open to clarification if I am wrong. what I really want to stress with that is because you're having to learn this new engine effectively, you're having to learn new tools and stuff before some quality of life stuff gets released and stuff. I wonder if this is going to be the same engine Arma 4 is going to be on. And if going into Arma Reforger and having to learn this tool set, this skill set, right? I wonder if that's going to transfer to Arma 4. So going into Reforger at this time could be seen as an investment, especially if you can one-to-one transfer those skills from Arma Reforger into 4. Sure, I'm sure you can, as a modder, go in from Arma 3 into Arma 4 with little difficulty, especially if you have experience in coding or experience in modding. I'm sure that it's just maybe a little bit of a adjustment to the new engine or adjustment to new things. Obviously, as time goes on in both Reforger and Arma 4, we will get more tools, obviously. But I'm very curious if the state Arma Reforger is in might be seen as a testing ground for modders to be able to get used to it, to be able to go into Arma 4, pretty armed to the teeth with modding knowledge. That's kind of what I pulled out from that. I wanted to draw attention to that. Not that the game's bad by any means, right? I mean, it's just it's in that state where Skyrim Special Edition launches, and there's not mods for Special Edition, but there's mods for base Skyrim, so you got to go back through and do it, right? Just it makes sense.
That we call the sweet forever.
As we now come to the end of this video, the only thing I can really think of is how much I didn't get to cover. There was a legal battle over the name Arma 2, or that someone's making a Titanfall mod right now, or really just diving into Arma Reforger more, but I suppose that is a next time kind of thing. This obviously has not been my normal content, however, it was very refreshing to make, besides the stress that I might butcher the subject. If you did enjoy, consider subscribing. It may not be the last time I do this. Or if you want to watch full videos on some of the mods I mentioned, check out the channel. There is a lot of stuff. I can't thank everyone enough that made it to this point. I think my closing words are done, and I honestly don't know how to end this video. So that's it. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, Bohemia, for making some wonderful games, and thank you guys for being wonderful viewers.
He ends a video better than I do. I thought that this was absolutely amazing. I do think that he was the best person to cover this. I think he was an amazing person to cover this. I know he has reservations, not knowing if he was the right person to cover this. I think he was the perfect person to cover this. Personability, knowledge base, being able to talk to others, being able to outline biases, being able to outline things for, weirdos like me who are like, what about the legal aspect of this, right? I mean, he outlined realistically everything. Like, this is this is Arma. So I could tell you about the basic gameplay, but the basic gameplay is going to change depending on what you're playing, right? Like, you have a Night Ear, right? Or you can have a Halo mod, or you can have Star Wars mod, right? Like, it's super interesting to think about, and it really speaks to, at least from this, it speaks to the integrity and the character of the community and how much fun can be had. I mean, I think it's a great sandbox. Milsim, yeah, I think a lot of people still can do it, especially if we're talking about base Arma, right? But at the end of the day, it is a simulator. It is a sandbox, right? Well, sandbox more correct rather than simulator. Fish news, right? You can do a lot of really cool and creative things in it, and there's really cool and creative tools that people have made. And I feel like this is one of those communities, much like Warhammer, where you go up to the store and you go in, somebody's like, hi, how you doing? And they want to talk to you about their favorite army, and they want to talk to you about why they like Grey Knights. They want to talk to you about, that Magnus guy, he's pretty spooky, but this is how I deal with this Magnus guy, right? I'm getting the same vibes from that, and I wonder if there is like the Venn diagram, like the two circles crossing each other. I do wonder if there is a cross there. So I think he did an amazing job on this. I think that this was the perfect video to encapsulate this. And honestly, for me, this is making me want to make sure that Arma 3 is installed. Maybe try my hand at some things, because this was really cool. I know my, what I do keeps me a little bit busy, especially because I'm so tired consistently. God, I am so tired all the time. This was cool. This was cool to see. I think he put out an amazing piece here. And I like that it was something different. I know a lot of people didn't necessarily watch his Final Fantasy XIV videos. I know a lot of people didn't necessarily watch Fish News or even like Fish News. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. I like that he's able to do work like this and is still able to come out. And there was no shortage of, hi, Kip, you going to react to this? In usual Kip fashion where I just react to videos that are like an hour long. So thank you, RubixRaptor, for an amazing piece. I think this was amazing. Absolutely. I can see how with your expertise and experience, there are definitely things that you could probably miss and probably did miss, like you mentioned with the Titanfall mod and the Arma 2 legal battle. But I think you covered this perfectly, and I think that this is definitely a premier piece if we want to talk about what is Arma? What is an Arma video, right? you could send this to somebody, and they could get a very much a fairly complete picture of what this is. So thank you for putting this out, and thank you everyone for watching. I really do appreciate it. It's been almost 2.5 hours. Well, it has been 2.5 hours. Hopefully you enjoyed this. This is definitely one of those you put on to when driving. Well, no driving hands-free, mind you, or working. Definitely one of those VOD status ones. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.